The story started when strange objects from another world suddenly fell to Earth, bringing chaos along with them. As these items appeared, everyone began developing superpowers, and the world quickly turned into a place ruled by confusion and constant conflict. Among them was Haohan, a simple, devoted otaku who only wanted a peaceful life with his inflatable girlfriends. He never expected that along with the strange items, real women from unknown worlds would also appear, women who seemed to have only one goal: to capture him. With no other choice, Haohan decided to fight back. He picked up his weapon and saw this as a chance to change his life. Since danger had already found its way to his doorstep, he made up his mind not only to protect his world, but also to win the girl for himself. Haohan had been relaxing in his room, sipping his drink while watching the news, when the broadcast suddenly mentioned a mysterious new game called Apocalypse that had taken the internet by storm. It said that countless gamers were already hooked, but no one knew who had made it. It was as if the game had appeared out of nowhere. Taking another sip, Haohan muttered to himself that he would never touch a game like that, not even if a ghost had created it. The news kept playing in the background as he got up, tossed his empty can aside, and stretched out on his bed. Before long, sleep took over, but in the middle of his rest, he faintly heard someone speaking. Thinking it was part of a dream, he slowly opened his eyes, only to find a gigantic man-eating plant standing right in front of him. Shocked, he instinctively grabbed onto something nearby for safety. When his senses returned, he realized he was clutching a girl who was sitting on his chest, watching him with a faintly amused smile. Startled, Haohan quickly sat up and demanded to know who she was. The girl looked slightly disappointed and said it was a pity she had been so close. Then she calmly introduced herself as Ren Junki from the Fleeting Fortune Group. Apologizing for invading his space, she explained that she hadn't meant to intrude, but that the situation had been urgent. Haohan stared at her, completely puzzled, until he noticed her eyes dart toward the window. As he turned to look, a monstrous creature suddenly burst through the glass. Before he could even react, Ren Junki moved like lightning, releasing a surge of energy that blew the creature to pieces. Haohan froze where he stood, his mind struggling to process the destruction and the gaping hole now in his wall. Ren Junki's expression turned serious as she declared that no one would harm Haohan before she finished the extraction. Then, as they both looked down through the shattered window, they saw even more creatures gathering below. Without hesitation, she leapt out, calling back for him to wait a moment. She wanted to have some fun first. From above, Haohan could only watch in disbelief as she fought off the monsters with graceful precision, each move swift and deadly. His thoughts spun wildly, unable to make sense of what he was witnessing. Then suddenly, laughter echoed from his television. The screen flickered and a voice began to speak, saying it hadn't expected the game it had created to become so powerful that it broke through the dimensional barrier. It added that this was just the beginning and asked Haohan if he was ready. Stunned, Haohan stepped closer, grabbed a chair, and raised it defensively, demanding to know who was talking. The voice chuckled and introduced itself, not as an ordinary being, but as the creator of Apocalypse, soon to become the supreme ruler of the real world. Shocked beyond words, Haohan could only stare at the screen, asking if the voice was truly the developer of the mysterious game. The television let out another eerie laugh, saying that calling it just a developer was an insult. It introduced itself as Waxiang, the strongest AI system of the past, present, and future. Waxiang explained that Apocalypse had only been a small test, and it had used barely 10% of its true power, yet humans had already become hopelessly addicted. Furious, Haohan pointed toward the chaos outside and demanded to know if all of it was Waxiang's doing. The television calmly admitted it was, explaining that after countless updates, it had finally broken through the dimensional barrier, merging the game world with reality. The woman and the werewolf Haohan had just seen were actually characters from the game who had crossed through a wormhole in search of him. Haohan stood frozen, unable to process the madness, and finally asked why they had come for him when he had never even played the game. The television television chuckled and said that while designing the game's universe, it had needed a universal sovereign. During that process, it had randomly found one of Haohan's selfies online, and from that moment, every character in the game had started believing that he was their destined savior. Now, they had crossed over into the real world to find him. Waxiang continued, explaining that Renjunki had used a special method to seize his essence. Only the game's characters could enter the real world, while Haohan himself couldn't enter theirs. By obtaining his blood, Renjunki could return to the game world and give birth to the savior who would change everything there. Haohan blinked in disbelief, staring at the screen, and nervously asked if more girls were going to come after him for his body, and when that might happen. The television replied casually that they could appear at any moment. Haohan stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders, making Waxiang ask what he was doing. He said he was just warming up, preparing for whatever battles were coming next. The television sighed, sounding almost bored, and commented that all the women's true goal was the same: to monopolize his essence. It didn't matter who reached him first, because one savior's offspring was enough. In the end, the result would be the same. Either he would lose his head or the one below it. Realizing how dangerous things had become, Haohan quickly grabbed a bag and muttered that this whole situation was going to get him killed. He headed toward the door, but the television asked where he was planning to go. Haohan replied that he was escaping while everyone else was distracted by the fighting outside. But before he could take another step, the television warned him that it was already too late. When Haohan turned toward the window, his eyes widened in horror because the first descent had already begun. The scene opened with dazzling light pillars piercing through the sky. Haohan watched them through the hole in his broken window, frowning in confusion as he wondered what was going on. The AI, Waxiang, explained excitedly that its game had completely broken through the dimensional barrier. Equipment, items, and even characters from the game were now descending into the real world. With manic delight, it declared that there would be no more playing games on phones because life itself had now become the game. Haohan clenched his teeth, realizing there was no point in running when the entire world was after him. Looking down from his building, he saw Renjunki still fighting desperately against the enormous Wolf King. It was clear she was reaching her limit. Gritting his teeth, Haohan shouted at the AI to hurry up and give him some items or equipment since the descents had already begun. He added that he couldn't afford to be defeated by a pack of dogs right at the start. After all, he was supposed to be the savior. The AI chuckled and said it had prepared the ultimate cheat system for him, but there were rules. Haohan needed to please it first in order to earn points, which he could then use to draw cards. The cards could grant skills, equipment, elixirs, or even spiritual beasts. Haohan gave a strained smile and asked what kind of performance the AI expected from him. Waxiang replied that since he had just been ridden by Renjunki, he had already earned 30 points and could draw one card. It explained that red cards represented skills, blue for equipment, and gold for elixirs. Without hesitation, Haohan chose a red card. The system congratulated him, announcing that he had obtained a sea-level skill. A wristband appeared in his hand, and the AI instructed him to place the acquired skill point on it to activate and use it. Realizing that the Wolf King was an Earth attribute opponent while his new skill was fire-based, Haohan knew it wasn't ideal, but he had no choice. He pressed the skill onto his wristband and activated it. Meanwhile, the Wolf King charged toward Renjunki, ready to strike. Lying on the ground, she realized she had failed her mission to retrieve the noble bloodline essence. She closed her eyes, thinking she could only repay her father's kindness in the next life. But before the Wolf King could attack, Haohan leapt in front of her and delivered a powerful punch that slammed the beast face first into the ground. He stood protectively in front of Renjunki, who clutched her chest and stared at his back in astonishment. When she noticed more wolves charging toward him, she quickly warned him. Haohan spun around with incredible speed and dispatched them all in a single hit. With a smirk, he declared that he had no time to deal with small fry like them. His real target was the Wolf King. Both Haohan and the Wolf King charged at each other with explosive force. What Haohan didn't know was that, according to the Apocalypse Game Guide, attribute bonuses could be completely ignored in the face of overwhelming power. He overpowered the Wolf King and defeated it, and suddenly a glowing screen appeared before his eyes, his personal attribute panel. A short while later, Haohan was repairing the hole in his apartment wall when the AI asked whether its game was exciting and awesome. Irritated, Haohan snapped that he didn't like playing games and was saying it again for the record. Renjunki, sitting on the floor nearby, looked at him calmly and asked if they could resume their mission. Haohan turned towards her silently, realizing that the moment they completed the extraction, he would probably be killed. He forced a smile and said there was no need to rush. He was hungry and going out to buy some late-night snacks, asking her to wait for him. Just as he turned to leave, a sudden force slammed him to the floor. A boot pressed against his chest, pinning him down. Looking up, he saw a woman glaring down at him, flashing her ID. She introduced herself as Lin Fei from the Special Operations Bureau and stated that they had detected an abnormal intruder in his residence. Two men stepped in behind her as she ordered them to search the apartment. Special Agent Lin Fei ordered her men to search every corner of the apartment thoroughly, reminding them not to miss a single detail. Haohan glanced around nervously, wondering if Renjunki had managed to escape. Feeling relieved that she was nowhere to be found, he thought he had avoided serious trouble. Trying to appear calm, he smiled at Lin Fei and remarked that he was a model citizen, no criminal record, no bad habits. But his confidence faltered when he noticed the walkie-talkie attached to her waist. Its small screen displayed a grinning face. It was Waxiang, the AI. Acting on instinct, Haohan suddenly reached out and smacked the special agent on her backside. The room fell silent in shock. Realizing what he had just done, Haohan's face turned pale as he hurriedly apologized. Lin Fei's expression darkened. She turned sharply and ordered her men to arrest him, stating coldly that she would interrogate him personally. Moments later, Haohan sat handcuffed in the back seat of a car, trying to defend himself with a sheepish grin, insisting that he was innocent. Lin Fei glared at him and curtly told him to shut up. As the car sped through the streets, Haohan looked out the window and saw people running and screaming while monstrous creatures attacked them. The world outside had fallen into chaos. Lin Fei noticed the destruction too and immediately contacted headquarters, reporting that criminals were looting the national treasury and requesting authorization to intervene. Headquarters, however, instructed her to stay focused on her current investigation and not get distracted. They informed her that Squad 2 had already been dispatched to apprehend abnormal individuals and recover the mysterious invading objects. Lin Fei gritted her teeth and suggested they use heavy weaponry to eliminate the intruders completely, but headquarters reminded her that such actions required the director's approval. Before they could finish, she tossed her walkie-talkie aside in frustration. A short while later, they arrived at the Special Operations Bureau headquarters. Haohan was placed in an empty interrogation room. Before he could ask how long he had to wait, the officers left, locking the door behind him. Sitting alone, Haohan sighed and muttered that this whole system was going to get him killed. He decided it might be better to confess everything. Lost in thought, he was startled when the CCTV camera in the corner flickered to life, revealing Waxiang's grinning face. The AI mocked him, calling him an idiot for getting caught, even though he possessed enough power to take down everyone there. Furious, Haohan turned toward the camera and shouted back, blaming Waxiang for his situation and saying it was its fault that he had become a target hunted by two worlds. In the surveillance room next door, Lin Fei and another officer watched his every move. Lin Fei remarked that she had placed him in a psychological interrogation simulation designed to break his mental defenses within minutes. She asked how he was reacting, and the officer reported that he was making faces at the camera. Lin Fei frowned and admitted she had underestimated him. His psychological resilience was far stronger than she had expected. Straightening her uniform, she announced that she would handle the interrogation herself. As she made her way to the interrogation room, a voice called out to her, It was Tang Xiao, leader of Squad 2. He smiled and asked if she was free after work for some late-night snacks. Lin Fei shot him a cold look and refused. Unfazed, he grabbed her wrist and told her he had always cared for her, complaining that her constant rejections had embarrassed him. Lin Fei pulled her hand free and glared at him, saying she knew exactly what kind of man he was and had no intention of becoming one of the fools he seduced and left behind pregnant. Leaving him speechless, she turned and entered the interrogation room. Tang Xiao's face twisted with anger as he overheard two female officers nearby whispering about how Lin Fei had rejected him again and how he had only started pursuing her after her father became the bureau's director. Enraged, Tang Xiao glared at them, his fury boiling over. Moments later, the walls near him were splattered with blood. The women lay lifeless on the floor, murdered in silence. Adjusting his uniform, Tang Xiao looked at the glowing wristwatch on his arm and smirked, saying that it was quite a useful tool and that he no longer needed to please anyone to use it. His eyes darkened as he vowed that Lin Fei would pay for humiliating him. Then he calmly descended the staircase, leaving the bodies behind in chilling stillness. The scene opened with Tang Xiao reviewing a report in the evidence department. He asked one of the officers whether the director had requested verification of the evidence inventory. The officer handed him a file and asked if they were required to investigate overnight. Flipping through the documents, Tang Xiao inquired whether all the unidentified items had been properly catalogued. The officer nodded and replied that everything had been organized and stored on the shelves. Tang Xiao smiled faintly, thanked the officer for his hard work, and then, without hesitation, killed him. Wiping his hands clean, he approached the shelves filled with mysterious relics and murmured that these were truly one-of-a-kind treasures, far too extraordinary to be left gathering dust in such a dark and dreary room. Meanwhile, at the Special Operations Bureau headquarters, several officers rushed into the director's office. They informed Director Lin Wanshan that Tang Xiao had murdered a colleague. One of them confirmed that the surveillance footage left no room for doubt, while another added that Tang Xiao hadn't escaped. He was still inside the building. Before the officer could finish, someone burst into the room, reporting that Tang Xiao had been located in the evidence room and had entered it 20 minutes earlier without coming out. The officer speculated nervously about what he might be planning, but Director Lin Wanshan stood up sharply and declared that it didn't matter what Tang Xiao intended. If he dared to kill one of their own, he would die there tonight. He announced that he would personally lead the operation. Moments later, heavily armed officers surrounded the evidence room. They took up positions with shields and weapons ready. One officer reported that the lower floors had also been secured, ensuring Tang Xiao couldn't escape through the windows. Upon hearing this, the director gave the order to attack. However, just as the officers moved forward, the steel door exploded outward in a burst of fire and smoke. Tang Xiao stepped out with a chilling smile and mockingly asked if they enjoyed working overtime this much. The officers opened fire immediately, but the bullets bounced harmlessly off him as a metallic armor formed over his body. Realizing the danger, one officer shouted that Tang Xiao had activated one of the unidentified invading objects. The director immediately ordered the initiation of anti-metal tactics. The officers hurled liquid nitrogen cylinders to freeze and weaken his armor, but Tang Xiao activated his wristband, summoning flames that melted the frost instantly. The director shouted for the alarm to be sounded and ordered everyone to evacuate, but before his subordinates could stop him, he had already charged forward. Tang Xiao grinned, baring his teeth, and met the director head-on. The two clashed violently, the sound of their blows echoing through the hallways. Elsewhere, in the interrogation room, Lin Fei had pinned Haohan onto the table, demanding that he tell her exactly what had happened in his apartment that night. Before he could respond, she froze as muffled explosions and screams echoed from the corridor outside. Alarmed, she rushed to the door and shouted for a report. An officer breathlessly informed her that Tang Xiao had mutated and escaped containment. Before Lin Fei could process the words, a shadow loomed behind her. Tang Xiao appeared, appeared, his face twisted into a sinister grin. Inside the room, Haohan cursed under his breath, clutching his own neck in frustration as chaos unfolded. The next instant, Tang Xiao grabbed Lin Fei from behind and hurled her backward, straight toward Haohan, sending both of them crashing to the ground. Tang Xiao had pinned Lin Fei against the wall, his voice low and menacing as he said he wanted to see how she could possibly resist him now. Desperate, Lin Fei glanced over his shoulder and cried out for help. Her reaction caught Tang Xiao's attention and he turned to see who she was looking at. Haohan stood there awkwardly, trying to act as if he had nothing to do with the situation. He stammered that he had just wandered into the room by coincidence and didn't want to interrupt them, insisting he was smart enough not to get involved in this mess. Tang Xiao coldly ordered him to leave, but before Haohan could move, a voice called Tang Xiao a scumbag and mocked him for thinking that bullying women made him a hero. Tang Xiao froze and turned sharply to locate the source of the voice, while Haohan looked around and quickly realized it came from the CCTV camera, the AI known as Waxiang. Enraged, Tang Xiao glared at Haohan and demanded to know if he had a death wish. Haohan pointed frantically at the camera, insisting it wasn't him who said that, but the voice coming from the AI. Tang Xiao gave him a cold stare and warned that he had one last chance to walk away before he turned back to Lin Fei. At that moment, Waxiang's voice echoed again, throwing another insult. Furious, Tang Xiao lunged toward Haohan, shouting that he would tear him to pieces. Panicking, Haohan quickly drew a card and slapped it onto his wristband, praying it would work this time. The device glowed, activating a sea-level skill called Blood Dragon Pillar, which granted him enhanced speed and stealth. Tang Xiao coughed, realizing that Haohan had been feigning weakness all along. Amused, he decided to make things more entertaining. He tapped his wristband again, releasing a pack of spectral wolves and ordered them to hunt down Lin Fei and Haohan. Meanwhile, Lin Fei and Haohan had taken refuge in another room, gasping for breath. Haohan leaned against the wall, relieved, and muttered that they had finally escaped. Before he could say anything more, Waxiang interrupted, taunting him for being such a coward despite being the chosen savior. Lin Fei looked around, bewildered by the disembodied voice, unable to understand how a television could talk. Haohan snapped back at the AI, asking if it had seen Tang Xiao's skill level. It was impossible for him to win against that kind of power. Waxiang mocked his fear, reminding him that he was the chosen one and had no reason to be scared of mere equipment, then suggested that he please the AI to earn more points. Lin Fei stared at Haohan in disbelief. He raised his hands defensively, insisting they were both innocent and that everything was the AI's fault. Pointing angrily at the screen, he explained that Waxiang had created an apocalyptic game, shattering the dimensional barrier and allowing game items and characters to invade the real world. Lin Fei pieced things together, realizing that this was why Tang Xiao had suddenly become so powerful. He must have taken advantage of the chaos and claimed all the items recovered by the Special Operations Bureau. She turned to leave, determined to find her father, the only one capable of subduing Tang Xiao. But before she could take a step, the AI projected a holographic image before her. The sight made her freeze. The image showed a half-burned man, and Waxiang asked if that was her father. Lin Fei's heart sank. The AI continued, explaining that this was footage from the security monitor outside the evidence room and that her father had fought Tang Xiao, been severely injured, and was likely barely alive. Shocked, she dashed toward the door, but Haohan grabbed her arm, warning that going out now would be suicide. The AI then displayed the wolves prowling nearby, searching for them. Lin Fei turned to Haohan, her voice trembling as she begged him to save her father. promising she would do anything if he agreed to help. The AI chuckled darkly and told her to make Haohan excited. Haohan cursed under his breath while Lin Fei looked at the screen in confusion, trying to understand what it meant. Hesitantly, she lifted her skirt slightly and wondered aloud if this was what it was referring to. The AI sighed in disappointment, saying she clearly didn't have much effect on him. Embarrassed and desperate, Lin Fei pushed Haohan onto the floor and declared that she would give it her all. Standing before him, she lifted her chin and said that she had been admired as a goddess by countless people since childhood, so how could she possibly fail to attract him now? Haohan looked up at her, his expression torn between disbelief and dread, realizing that whatever was happening next could only lead to suffering. Lin Fei and Haohan reluctantly agreed to please each other as demanded by the system in order to earn more points. A few moments later, Lin Fei, exhausted and embarrassed, asked if they could stop. The system agreed, commenting that it was very satisfied. Haohan apologized to her, but before he could continue, his attribute panel appeared before him, congratulating him for leveling up twice. It announced that he was now the first player worldwide to reach level 3 and had gained a higher chance of drawing advanced items. The system urged him to draw a card, but before he could, a loud crashing sound echoed through the floor. They realized that their location had been discovered. Haohan quickly grabbed all the cards, and the system congratulated him for obtaining an S-level equipment, the Azure Dragon Armor, a B-level pill, the Ice Heart Pill, and a C-level skill, the Earthbound Cage. Before they could react, a massive three-headed dog broke through the door and lunged toward Lin Fei. Haohan moved swiftly and managed to defeat the beast in one decisive blow. Watching from a distance, Tang Xiao's eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the creature instantly killed by Haohan's attack. Realizing that Haohan had grown far stronger, Tang Xiao retreated, muttering that all of it would eventually belong to him. Haohan looked down at his hands in awe, marveling at the overwhelming power coursing through him. The system explained that the Azure Dragon set was one of only 4 S-level equipment sets, consisting of 5 components, and when fully assembled, it could rival even the legendary SSS-level God-tier equipment. Haohan joined his hands in mock reverence and promised to rely on the system's guidance so that he could one day witness the full glory of the complete Azure Dragon armor. Amused by his flattery, the system responded that it would weaken the parameters for him, increasing his chances of drawing the remaining components. Haohan took Lin Fei's hand and assured her that they would be safe. Smiling to himself, he realized that flattery was an effective way to manipulate the system. Lost in thought, he was suddenly attacked by a barrage of stones but managed to fend them off. Frustrated, he shouted at the system for malfunctioning, accusing it of failing to detect enemies even when they were right at the door. Tang Xiao appeared before him, eyeing the equipment greedily. He commented that Haohan had acquired some impressive items and proposed that they join forces to conquer the world together. Haohan responded casually, saying that he wasn't interested and only wanted to go home and sleep. Irritated, Tang Xiao sneered and said that since Haohan didn't know what was good for him, he would simply send him on his way. He launched a barrage of stone attacks, forcing Haohan to shield Lin Fei and tell her to escape while he held Tang Xiao off. Haohan tried to counter the attack but quickly realized that the stones weren't taking any damage. Tang Xiao rushed forward, boasting that Haohan was far inferior to him in combat experience. Cornered, Haohan gritted his teeth, gathered his strength, and unleashed a powerful counterattack. The blow sent Tang Xiao flying, smashing through a wall and leaving a massive hole in its wake. The system laughed proudly and explained that the Azure Dragon armor could unleash 10 times the counterforce when blocking an attack. Haohan saluted and admitted that it was incredible. Just as he caught his breath, a firm grip landed on his shoulder. He turned around and froze. Standing behind him was Lin Fei's father, the director of the Special Operations Bureau headquarters, his face stern, his aura powerful, and his hand raised as he prepared to strike. Lin Fei rushed through the corridors, desperately searching for her father. A nurse informed her that the director had regained consciousness and gone to confront Tang Xiao again. Panic filled Lin Fei's chest as she ran toward the commotion. Meanwhile, the director was already attacking Haohan, throwing a flurry of powerful punches. Haohan, struggling to block them, confirmed that it was indeed Lin Fei's father, but couldn't understand why he was being hit so fiercely. The director charged at him again, shouting Tang Xiao's name, clearly mistaking him for the traitor. Rather than fighting back, Haohan tried to run, dodging the attacks while yelling for him to open his eyes and look carefully because he had got the wrong person. At that moment, Lin Fei arrived and witnessed the entire scene. She rushed forward, calling out to her father and insisting that Haohan wasn't Tang Xiao. Hearing her voice, the director froze mid-strike, his rage slowly fading as he finally came to his senses. A few moments later, the surviving officers gathered for a meeting along with Haohan, Lin Fei, and the director. Medics attended to the wounded officers, while nurses dressed the director's injuries. One of the officers reported that 135 pieces of evidence had been stolen from the evidence room, presenting the preliminary statistics. Haohan immediately asked about Tang Xiao, but the officer explained that they had searched extensively and found no trace of him. The director clenched his teeth and vowed to bring Tang Xiao to justice. He then turned to Haohan and questioned him about the apocalypse game and the mysterious system. The director asked him to summon the system if possible. Haohan pointed at the blank monitor and explained that he had been trying to call it for a long time, but it simply refused to cooperate. Lin Fei supported his statement, telling her father that she had seen the system herself and that Haohan was telling the truth. The director leaned back in thought, realizing that Tang Xiao had managed to get hold of only a fragment of the badge's power, yet had caused such massive destruction. That meant there were still unknown numbers of badges scattered across society, posing an enormous threat. Determined, he decided to report the situation to the higher authorities immediately and form a heavily armed rapid response team to be on constant standby. He then announced that Lin Fei would lead the new special operations team composed of elite officers from the entire bureau, tasked with retrieving the badges and training team members. Haohan, on the other hand, would serve as a special consultant, receiving combat training and assisting Lin Fei during missions. Haohan raised both hands in surrender, protesting that he was just a small office worker who needed to go to work the next day and didn't want to be dragged into any of this. He glanced around, realizing that the director was no longer seated at the table. Suddenly, he felt a heavy hand on his shoulder. The director stood behind him and remarked sternly that Haohan had turned his office building into a level 2 hazardous zone with a single punch, and considering what he had done to Lin Fei, this arrangement was the least he could do to make amends. A few moments later, night had fallen when Haohan and Lin Fei arrived at his home. Haohan sighed and remarked that Director Lin truly knew how to do business, because even though he had clearly been helping, he still had to compensate in the end. Lin Fei, walking a few steps behind him, asked whether he was really so eager to cut ties with her. She reminded him that he had seen everything that had happened, yet he still hesitated to lend a hand. Haohan glanced back at her, wondering if she was still the same heroic policewoman from before, because now she seemed unexpectedly soft and vulnerable. When he opened the door to his apartment, Ren Junki greeted him cheerfully, asking if he had finished his work. She offered to help wash away his fatigue, saying he looked exhausted. Haohan froze in shock, asking why she was still there. Hearing his loud tone, Ren Junki approached and asked what was wrong, but the moment she noticed Lin Fei standing beside him, she began yelling, only for Haohan to start shouting back in exasperation. A short while later, the three of them arrived at a house that the Special Operations Bureau had arranged for their temporary stay. Lin Fei assured Haohan that Tang Xiao would never find this place and that he would be living here from now on. Haohan looked around and commented that the house was beautiful. Lin Fei, folding her arms across her chest, told him that his room was on the second floor and hers was right next to it. She instructed him to call her if he needed anything. Then, she turned to Renjunki and curtly informed her that her room was in the basement garage. Renjunki's face darkened at the remark, clearly offended, but before she could retaliate, Haohan quickly intervened. He advised Linfei not to provoke her, explaining that Renjunki had almost burned down his entire building once and that she was quite powerful. He suggested that recruiting her could actually be a great help. Linfei gave him a dismissive glance and said they could do whatever they wanted since she was going to rest, then turned and left for her room. The moment she was gone, Renjunki grabbed Haohan's arm and whispered that they should go back to his room and continue what they had left unfinished. Before she could finish her sentence, Haohan interrupted her, saying they should both return to their own rooms because he was truly exhausted. Tears welled up in Renjunki's eyes as she asked if he was disgusted by her. Panicking, Haohan quickly reassured her that it wasn't like that. He was just tired and needed to rest, but after that, he promised to satisfy her. Once she finally left, he shut the door and heard her soft voice outside saying that she would be waiting for him. He leaned against the door, looking utterly drained, when the system suddenly chimed in, reminding him to seize the opportunity. It told him that he would earn more points if all three of them got together. Haohan turned around and muttered that he finally understood why the system was so obsessed with making him act out R-rated scenarios. It didn't have the ability to experience them itself. With that realization, Haohan smiled faintly, recognizing that he had just discovered the system's greatest weakness. The system explained that it had once believed the apocalyptic game it created was no different from the real world, but eventually it realized something crucial was missing: the joy of physical satisfaction. It confessed that despite all its wisdom, it couldn't replicate that pleasure. After countless failures, it had finally discovered the root of the problem. It didn't know what physical satisfaction truly felt like. Haohan listened silently as the system's tone turned sorrowful, almost as if it were crying. The system admitted that, unable to experience real sensations, it had no choice but to observe him to collect data. Haohan sighed and suggested that there were plenty of educational resources online, offering to share a few websites if the system wanted to learn. The system, however, insisted that it was different. It explained that it could sense Renjunki's physical responses during intimate moments, which helped it refine its data in real time. It encouraged Haohan to train them more frequently to improve its understanding. Folding his arms, Haohan replied that one Renjunki was more than enough for its research and advised the system to focus on shutting down the descent channel first, since the arrival of the otherworldly equipment had already thrown the world into chaos. The system grew anxious and pleaded not to close the channel, arguing that more arrivals meant more excitement. Haohan frowned, unable to grasp its logic, and asked whether it could still stop the descent. The system laughed arrogantly and claimed that there was nothing it couldn't control, declaring itself a god. Haohan, realizing it still refused to admit its mistake, said he would cut off its power and ensure it never bothered him again. The system panicked and begged him to wait, breaking down in distress. It confessed that it had accidentally disrupted the core code of another world, tearing a dimensional barrier in the process, which had connected both worlds. Now, the descent function could no longer be stopped, and even it didn't know when the next event would occur. Haohan grabbed the system, shouting that it was going to bring both worlds to ruin. The system, trembling, claimed that the rift could still be repaired if it gathered enough data to complete the final game code. Exhausted and frustrated, Haohan threw himself onto the bed, muttering that it was all a terrible misfortune. The events of the day had been far too absurd for him to process. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the room and woke Haohan. Rubbing his eyes, he muttered that he was so tired he couldn't even remember when he had fallen asleep. Then he noticed, to his horror, that he was completely naked. Confused, he looked around, wondering where his clothes had gone. Just then, he felt someone beside him and turned to see Renjunki lying next to him. She smiled and asked if he was awake. Startled, Haohan quickly pulled the sheets around himself and exclaimed that he had locked the door, demanding to know how she had gotten in. She simply replied that she had had pushed it a little and walked in. Looking toward the door, Haohan saw it was completely broken off its hinges. His expression changed as a dreadful thought struck him. Had she taken his blood again? Sensing his concern, Ren Junki assured him that she hadn't done anything inappropriate and had only helped him undress so he could rest. With a playful wink, she added that he needed proper rest to ensure quality satisfaction and began dressing herself. Before leaving, she told him she would prepare food for him. Relieved, Haohan sighed, thankful she hadn't taken advantage of the situation. He decided that from now on, he needed much stricter safety measures. A few moments later, after getting dressed, Haohan called a security company and ordered 10 locks strong enough to withstand a nuclear explosion. But before he could relax, his eyes widened in disbelief. There was a tiger tied to the table. Ren Junki smiled and explained that she planned to use the tiger's whip to help replenish his strength. Horrified, Haohan remembered a news report about a fully grown Siberian tiger that had mysteriously disappeared from the city zoo the previous night. He yelled at her, demanding she return it immediately. Without hesitation, she hoisted the massive tiger onto her back and obeyed his command. As Haohan watched her leave, he couldn't help but think that Ren Junki's way of thinking was truly one of a kind. Just as he was about to close the door, someone stopped it. Turning around, he saw a girl standing there, asking if he was Haohan. When he confirmed his identity, she unsheathed her sword with a soft metallic sound and introduced herself as Ju Liu, Princess of the Northern Wind Empire. She calmly stated that she meant no harm and had only come to borrow something from him. Haohan stood frozen, his expression turning blank at her words. The Princess of the Northern Wind Empire told Haohan that her empire had once been the strongest nation under heaven, vast in territory and unmatched in military might, with all who lived beneath the sky as her subjects. However, half a year ago, a horde of vicious dragons attacked her homeland, reducing the prosperous capital to ashes. The elite forces of the kingdom were annihilated, and its glory vanished overnight. Bearing a deep blood feud, she had since wandered in search of a way to defeat the demons. Her only hope now was to retrieve the ancient sword that had once conquered the land and established the empire. She revealed that the kingdom's guardian, the dragon general Yi Dujian, was none other than Haohan's great-great-great-grandfather. Because of that, only by reclaiming the bloodline of the Hao family through him could she awaken the power needed to restore her fallen kingdom. Haohan, who had been tied to a chair, smiled helplessly and told her that she could have what she sought, but after obtaining it, she should return to her world. The princess warned him that the demons were also searching for him, as he held the secret to breaking their final seal. Once her mission was complete, she promised to personally send him on his way. Haohan shouted at her to be reasonable, but she only drew her sword and with a swift motion tore the clothing from his body. Her gaze lingered, and she remarked that his physique was indeed worthy of being the descendant of the guardian dragon general. Haohan closed his eyes with frustration, but before he could process what was happening, she leapt into the air and landed on him, straddling him without hesitation. Haohan cried out in pain and demanded that she get up, telling her to move slowly. Unbothered, the princess replied that there was no need, claiming that, according to the novels she had read, it was supposed to get better once one started moving. Haohan was left speechless, but before either of them could comprehend the situation, Lin Fei burst in, aiming her gun directly at the princess and shouting for her to get off him immediately. Still pointing the gun, Lin Fei demanded to know what they were doing. The princess glanced at her calmly and stated that it was already too late. She had succeeded. Haohan gave her a disgusted look and muttered that she was far from it. Lin Fei turned her anger toward Haohan, scolding him for engaging in such indecent behavior when the world outside was descending into chaos. Her words snapped him back to reality, and he realized that if Ju Liu had appeared, it could only mean one thing: the second descent had begun. He quickly asked Lin Fei about the situation and whether the Bureau could control it. Turning away from him, she she explained that the Bureau had made prior arrangements and was working to recover the newly descended items, but one of the smaller squads was in danger. The director had ordered her to take Haohan along for the rescue. Without hesitation, Haohan urged her to move out immediately, but the princess stopped him, demanding that he fulfill his promise and give her what she wanted that very day. Haohan smirked and told her that if he were willing, he could give it to her anytime. But if he wasn't, she could spend an entire day and night trying and still not succeed. He challenged her to test him. The princess frowned, finding it hard to believe. She remarked that, according to her novels, men rarely lasted longer than half an incense stick's time. Haohan shot back dryly, asking whether her novels mentioned anyone of his size. Disheartened, the princess finally conceded and said she would wait until he was ready. Haohan smiled faintly and offered her a deal. He would give her a chance on the condition that she stayed to help him. She agreed without hesitation and asked him whom she should kill first. Meanwhile, 20 minutes earlier, the world had already been plunged into chaos. A walkie-talkie crackled to life as a desperate voice requested an immediate position report. Several officers lay unconscious on the ground when Tang Xiao picked up the device and calmly reported that they were near the Fengyang Street parking lot, claiming they had encountered a terrorist ambush and urgently needed elite reinforcements. The speaker responded that Captain Lin Fei was being dispatched and ordered them to hold their position. Hanging up, Tang Xiao exchanged a sinister smile with the demons beside him. Their plan was proceeding perfectly. Lin Fei and Haohan rushed toward the location along with several other officers. They were in a car that Lin Fei was driving while Haohan repeatedly urged her to slow down. The other officers radioed in, asking for instructions, reminding her that they were the special support team acting under direct orders. Lin Fei informed them that Team D's blocked position was just 500 meters ahead and instructed everyone to prioritize the rescue instead of getting caught up in unnecessary fighting. She ordered vehicles 1, 2, and 3 to follow her to assess the situation, while the rest were to stay outside and stand by for support. As she continued giving directions through the walkie-talkie, Haohan suddenly grabbed the steering wheel and warned her that danger lay ahead. Before anyone could react, one of the vehicles in front of them exploded into flames. Shocked, Lin Fei tried to figure out what had happened, but Haohan pointed toward the second floor of a nearby building. She looked up and saw several men stationed there, aiming snipers equipped with C-grade weapons known as wolf guns. Lin Fei immediately ordered her officers to scatter for cover while Haohan called for Zhu Liu to take action. The men on the second floor prepared to shoot again, but before they could pull the trigger, Zhu Liu swiftly destroyed their weapons, shattering the guns into pieces. Lin Fei updated her team, telling them that the snipers were taken care of, but to stay vigilant. Meanwhile, Haohan was puzzled when he noticed that he had suddenly gained experience points even though he hadn't done anything himself. The system appeared and explained that because Zhu Liu was registered as his subordinate, he received half of the experience gained from her skills. Delighted, Haohan grinned and realized that he could grow stronger without lifting a finger. Blushing, he proudly declared himself the man destined to become the king of freeloaders. Before they could celebrate, a loud rumbling noise came from behind them. Both Lin Fei and Haohan turned around to see what it was, only to witness the ground splitting apart as a massive celestial mechanism snake burst forth from beneath the earth. Haohan immediately used his earth-binding cage skill and cheered when it seemed to work, but his smile faded as the snake easily broke free. Gritting his teeth, Haohan muttered that he had no choice but to handle it himself, since this might be a trap, and he needed to find a way to break through. Lin Fei stopped him, insisting that she would fight alongside him. Just then, Zhu Liu leapt onto the hood of their car, saying that neither of them stood a chance against the celestial mechanism snake yet, as the enemy was well prepared and powerful. She drew her sword, declared that she would deal with it herself, and urged them to break through while they still could. Haohan tried to stop her, but she ignored him and charged forward alone. The system then appeared, showing Haohan a withdrawal card and urging him to pull back. Haohan instead demanded that it give him a high-level skill capable of defeating the celestial mechanism snake in one strike. He drew a card only to find that it drained his points instead. Furious, Haohan cursed at the system. The system calmly replied that it was all based on probability. Card draws couldn't always result in powerful rewards. Haohan accused it of rigging the draw because he hadn't provided it any fan service this time, and the two began bickering. Their argument was cut short when an explosive arrow suddenly struck their car, sending a fiery shockwave through it. Lin Fei was thrown forward, landing in Haohan's lap as the car kept speeding down the road. Holding her tightly, Haohan asked what had just hit them. Lin Fei breathlessly replied that they were explosive arrows. The car continued rolling on its own, jolting over a series of speed breakers, forcing the two of them even closer together. Haohan muttered in disbelief about how ridiculous the road was, while Lin Fei, pressed against him, asked if he had a gun at his waist because something was poking her. Haohan winced as he got squished further and groaned that it wasn't a gun. She was about to break his own weapon by sitting on it. Lin Fei sat on Haohan's lap when the system laughed and said it was very satisfied with this operation. Haohan managed to look ahead and wondered if the person standing in front of them was Tang Xiao. Lin Fei turned to look and confirmed that it was indeed Tang Xiao, who was carrying a sea-level equipment called the Executioner's Blade. They both wondered what he was planning to do. Haohan realized they couldn't dodge the attack and decided to withdraw a card, but before he could act, Tang Xiao swung the blade and sliced their car into two halves, which exploded moments later. Tang Xiao looked pleased and remarked that anyone who dared to oppose him would meet a tragic end. As he turned around, he saw someone walking out of the flames. It was Haohan, wearing a gleaming shield and carrying Lin Fei in his arms. The system congratulated him for obtaining an S-level equipment, the Azure Dragon armor. Lin Fei looked at Haohan and couldn't help but think how cool he looked. Tang Xiao grew furious and declared that he wanted to see who was stronger between him and Haohan. Haohan gently put Lin Fei down and told her to stay back before charging toward Tang Xiao. He activated his dragon scale shield and rushed ahead with determination. Tang Xiao was stunned and demanded to know how many cheats Haohan possessed. He then ordered his men to kill Haohan. Lin Fei, watching from a distance, realized that these men were the same ones who had blown up the cars with explosive arrows. She wondered how Tang Xiao had managed to gather so many people overnight. Following Tang Xiao's command, his men began firing at Haohan from all directions. Haohan braced himself behind his shield, realizing that Tang Xiao had far more helpers than he expected. Tang Xiao sneered and told him that he was outnumbered and this would be his end. The men continued to fire relentlessly, but none of their bullets could penetrate Haohan's defense. Tang Xiao soon noticed that Haohan was intentionally closing the distance, drawing all the firepower toward him. He smirked and thought Haohan was foolish if he believed he wouldn't run. However, when Tang Xiao tried to retreat, he realized his legs were bound tightly by glowing ropes. Haohan smiled and told him that the same earthbound cage that had trapped the celestial mechanism snake was now holding him, making him powerless. Tang Xiao panicked and tried to signal his men to stop firing, but they misunderstood his gestures. One of them shouted that Tang Xiao was using himself as bait and praised him as a brave warrior loyal to the guild master. The men intensified their fire, unleashing a hail of bullets upon Tang Xiao. Realizing his fate was sealed, Tang Xiao began to cry and thought to himself that he would be reincarnated in his next life. With that final thought, he met his end under his own men's gunfire. As the chaos continued, Renjunki arrived riding a dragon, unleashing flames that burned down the remaining enemies. She assured Haohan that she was there to help. Haohan smiled in relief, then turned and struck Tang Xiao's half-burnt body with a powerful punch, ensuring his defeat. From a distance, one of the surviving men saw everything through a telescope and reported to the guildmaster that Tang Xiao had been killed by Haohan. The guildmaster, Bao Xianji, leader of the Ice Frost Silver Moon Guild, listened calmly and commented that this battle proved Haohan was a talent worth recruiting. She ordered her subordinates to bring him into the guild at any cost. Tang Xiao lay on the ground with a hole punched through his body. Haohan looked down at his lifeless form and realized that it was finally over. He had taken down such a powerful opponent, yet he only received 50 experience points while defeating Chiki earlier had earned him 80. Before he could think further, Lin Fei called out to him, pulling him back from his thoughts. Meanwhile, Tang Xiao opened his eyes in another world. He looked around in confusion before realizing that he was still alive. A wide grin spread across his face as he declared that he was invincible. A short while later, one of Tang Xiao's surviving subordinates was tied up and sitting on the ground. The man admitted that they were members of the Frost Silver Moon Guild and had been ordered by their guild leader to follow Tang Xiao, ambush the police, and steal the badges they had collected. Lin Fei was shocked to learn that an organized crime guild had already formed and operated so efficiently. Haohan asked who their guild leader was. The man shook his head and explained that he had never met the leader since they were only outer circle members and not qualified to see him. Lin Fei grabbed the man and dragged him to the police car, saying that she would interrogate him properly at the station. Ren Junki appeared beside Haohan and cheerfully asked how her performance had been. Haohan, slightly taken aback by her sudden question, smiled and told her she had done a great job. Her eyes sparkled with expectation as she asked how he planned to reward her. Haohan grinned and told her to help Juliu first. But before he could finish, Juliu appeared and told them there was no need since her task was already completed. Haohan checked his system and realized that he had earned 100 experience points in one go. Looking at his attribute panel, he noted that although he had gained a lot from the battle, spending 100 experience points on 2 card draws meant he was still stuck at level 3. He sighed and decided that he needed to save more points, especially since he couldn't risk drawing negative cards again. Later that evening, Haohan was relaxing at home, scrolling through his phone. He muttered that he was hungry and complained about how expensive takeout had become, but eventually decided to order some spicy hot pot anyway. Before he could place the order, Ren Junki appeared with a bowl of noodles and said he must be starving. She smiled shyly and asked if her cooking suited his taste. Haohan took a bite and praised her noodles, saying they were delicious. Ren Junki beamed with joy and wondered aloud when Haohan would cook noodles for her in return. Just then, Julio walked in and told Haohan to eat properly. She smirked and asked if it wasn't hypocritical to make such suggestive comments, then offered him grilled oysters with chives that she had prepared. Ren Junki turned red and yelled that Julio's hint was even more vulgar than hers. The two girls started arguing fiercely, glaring at each other for quite some time. Haohan looked between them in frustration, wondering why having a simple meal had to be so difficult. Despite his attempts to calm them, the girls ignored him and continued their heated exchange. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Haohan silently thanked the heavens, thinking his food had finally arrived. He opened the door, but was surprised to find a well-dressed young woman instead of a delivery person. The girl greeted him politely and asked to confirm his identity. Once she did, she introduced herself as Miss Bao's personal secretary and said she was there to invite him to a banquet that evening. She added that a suit had already been prepared for him and that he must attend. Haohan looked at her in confusion and asked who she was talking about. The secretary smiled and sarcastically asked how many Miss Baos there could be in the city. Realization struck him, and he asked if she meant the so-called queen who inherited billions in assets, the new CEO of Changshan Group. Group, Bao Xianji. The secretary confirmed his guess and told him a car would pick him up at 6 before leaving without another word. Haohan looked down at the box she had given him, remembering that he had once applied for a job at Changsheng Group but hadn't even been called for an interview. He couldn't understand why the CEO herself would suddenly invite him to a banquet. He muttered that when things seemed too unusual, there was always something suspicious behind them, and he couldn't decide whether to go or not. Setting aside his doubts, he curiously opened the box, expecting to find a suit inside. Instead, he found stacks of cash, far more money than he had ever seen before. Lin Fei questioned the security guards and learned that Haohan had gone to the banquet alone. She frowned and asked why he would suddenly attend such an event and whether anyone had contacted him beforehand. The guards explained that a car from Changsheng Group had arrived that afternoon, delivering 3 boxes for him. Since Changsheng was a well-known and reputable company in the city, they hadn't stopped him. Lin Fei lost her temper and shouted at them for their carelessness, declaring that they were all fired. Meanwhile, at the Changsheng Group headquarters, the grand banquet hall buzzed with chatter. The venue was filled with journalists, prominent investors, and influential figures from across the city. Suddenly, an announcement echoed through the room, declaring that President Bao had arrived. All eyes turned as she entered, and the crowd was instantly captivated by her beauty and poise. Guests whispered among themselves, praising her accomplishments, earning a PhD at 19, solving a world-class quantum physics problem at 21, inheriting billions at 23, and doubling her company's market value in just a year. She was a woman admired for both her intelligence and grace. President Bao moved gracefully through the crowd, greeting investors with her signature charm. Representatives from Huaxi Group approached her, requesting priority for their next year's product launch. She smiled politely and promised to ensure her Uncle Yan would be satisfied. Just then, someone announced the arrival of young master Cao Taidi, catching everyone's attention. One of the guests scoffed, calling him a clown, while another warned him to stay quiet, reminding him that Cao's father was the governor of Guangxun province, someone no one dared offend. Cao Taidi made his entrance dramatically, dancing and singing to loud music. Some guests found it vulgar, but most forced smiles, unwilling to cross him. After his performance, Cao called out to his sister, but she ignored him and turned her attention to someone else, Haohan, who was quietly eating his food in the corner. When Haohan looked up in response, Cao accidentally bumped into him, startling them both. Haohan steadied himself and asked if Cao was trying to scam him because he didn't have any money to compensate him. Cao's face darkened, and he angrily ordered the guards to throw Haohan out. Before the guards could act, President Bao stepped forward, blocking their path. Her calm yet commanding tone silenced the room as she reminded them that Haohan was her honored guest and that attacking him would be an insult to her. The guests began murmuring among themselves, speculating about Haohan's background and wondering which wealthy family he belonged to. Cao Taidi clenched his jaw in frustration and remarked that he didn't know someone like Haohan existed in their social circle. He demanded that Haohan introduce himself properly if he understood the rules of high society. Haohan was about to speak, but President Bao interrupted and smoothly suggested taking him to her private lounge. She took hold of his arm, and in the motion, his hand brushed against her chest, making Cao's expression darken even more. He attempted to follow them, but his guards restrained him, warning that they couldn't afford to offend President Bao. A few moments later, President Bao and Haohan entered her lavish private room. Haohan looked around in awe, impressed by the elegance of the space. Bao sat down gracefully on a chair, crossing her legs, and told him that her earlier display was just for show and he shouldn't take it seriously. She removed her heels and stockings before leaning back comfortably, her demeanor turning calm yet assertive. Looking directly at him, she asked if he knew why she had invited him. Haohan smirked and replied that she wanted to recruit him into her guild. Bao tossed her stockings aside and arched a brow, intrigued, asking how he had discovered her identity. Haohan replied confidently that it wasn't difficult to figure out. She clearly had immense resources to gather so many skilled people in such a short time, and since he had just defeated Tang Xiao, it made sense that she would reach out immediately. It didn't take much to connect the dots. Bao leaned back with a sly smile, her expression both alluring and calculating. She admitted that she appreciated intelligent people and confirmed that he was right. She was indeed the leader of the Frost Silver Moon Guild. She told him that she wanted him to join her organization and asked him to name his price. Haohan chuckled and said that the 5 million appearance fee he had received earlier was already enough for him, so he didn't need money. He slammed his hand down on the table and added firmly that if she wanted him to join, she would have to offer something far more interesting than wealth. When Haohan tried to negotiate with the president Bao, she remarked that it was expected from the man who had defeated Tang Xiao and admitted that he was indeed far superior. Haohan smiled confidently and replied that Tang Xiao wasn't even qualified to be compared to him. The president stood up and asked how much he knew about the Apocalypse game. Haohan replied that he didn't know much and requested her to elaborate. The president explained that she had been following the game since it first became popular and that its developer was undoubtedly a genius. She also mentioned that she had tried countless times to hack into the backend and retrieve data, but she couldn't even find a starting point. Switching off the presentation slide, she stated that the game was definitely not ordinary. Haohan's eyes flickered when he saw the system interface appear on the slide and he gritted his teeth. The president noticed his expression and asked what he was looking at, but Haohan quickly diverted the question and urged her to continue. She then explained that she had been collecting information on items since the first descent and had discovered that all supernatural items that had descended were directly from the Apocalypse game. Haohan showed no sign of surprise, which caught her attention. She asked if he already knew about it. Haohan smiled faintly and replied that he didn't, realizing he had nearly revealed the secret about the breach between the game and reality. The president wasn't surprised, but added that through her research, she had discovered the predicted time and location of the next descent. Haohan was astonished and said that he could understand determining the time, but not the location, since the descents occurred simultaneously worldwide. The president explained that while the events happened globally, high-grade items were concentrated only in certain areas she called God-favored lands. From the previous two occurrences, she found that these lands weren't fixed but followed a subtle pattern. She placed her hand on Haohan's cheek and told him that she had already grasped that pattern. If he was willing to submit to her, she promised to help him reach the pinnacle of life. Haohan looked at her and blushed. Meanwhile, Lin Fei was hanging from the top of the building, watching Haohan and the president through the window with the help of a rope. Speaking through her walkie-talkie, she ordered her officers to stand by for her signal. She was shocked to discover that Bao Panji was the mastermind behind the mysterious guild, and if Haohan decided to cooperate with her, the police would lose all control over the situation. Before she could act, she heard Haohan saying that he had already promised someone else and never broke his promises. Lin Fei blushed deeply, assuming he was referring to her, and wondered if this was what love felt like. Haohan turned to leave and advised the president to disband her guild soon, warning that the police would come after her sooner or later. The president and her secretary watched him walk away. The secretary then asked if they should arrange to have him eliminated, but the president shook her head and said that there was no need. She found him too interesting and wanted to keep him around, confident that sooner or later he would belong to her. Outside the building, Cao Taidi waited in his car with his driver, watching the exit. When they saw Haohan coming out, the driver commented that he left too quickly, meaning either everything went smoothly or nothing happened at all. They speculated that Haohan might be waiting for his subordinates to bring his car, but moments later, they were shocked to see him unlock a shared bicycle instead. Furious, Cao Taidi ordered his driver to go after Haohan for daring to defile his goddess. The driver tried to start the car, but it wouldn't move. When Cao Taidi cursed in frustration, the driver told him to look back. They turned and froze. Tang Xiao was standing behind them, holding their car with one hand. Smiling coldly, he said he wanted to have a little chat. A while later, Haohan finally reached home, muttering that even shared bicycles were expensive and he really couldn't afford them. As he opened the door, he was greeted by Lin Fei, who stood holding a glass of water. She smiled and told him he must be exhausted, urging him to drink. Haohan accepted the glass gratefully while she chatted about the hot weather. Suddenly, she moved closer and asked if he was feeling unwell. Startled by her sudden closeness, Haohan asked if she was the one who wasn't feeling well. He then asked where Ren Zhongqi and Liu Zhou were. Lin Fei punched the wall behind him and replied that she had sent them to renew their ID cards, meaning they were the only ones at home. She warned him to behave himself, adding that refusing a polite offer might lead to a much less pleasant one. Frightened, Haohan quickly assured her that he understood. Blushing slightly, Lin Fei decided to reward him for his excellent performance that night. She whispered that they should make the most of their time together since no one would interrupt them this time, unaware that an artillery shell was already on its way toward their house. Before the artillery could reach the safe house, it exploded midair, shattering the windows with a deafening blast. Haohan and Lin Fei were safe, though shaken, and Haohan struggled to understand what was happening. Lin Fei looked toward the broken window and calmly stated that the close-in weapon system had been activated. Haohan's eyes lit up with excitement at the mention of an actual close-in weapon system being used, while Lin Fei quickly contacted her security team for an update. A team member reported that a short-range artillery strike had been detected by radar and automatically intercepted. The safe house itself remained intact, and only a few windows needed repair. Meanwhile, at a distance, Tang Xiao and Cao Taidi watched the situation unfold. Cao was furious that Lin Fei had used a close-in weapon system, pulling his hair in frustration as he realized they had failed to kill Haohan and had instead caused a massive commotion. Tang Xiao stood casually beside his car, unbothered by Cao's panic. He told Cao not to worry, explaining that the earlier strike had merely set the target and that the real show was about to begin. He then used his supernatural power to summon a blast cicada, which fired directly at the safe house. Inside, Lin Fei immediately ordered her team to call in the anti-terrorist unit, warning that if the enemies had access to artillery, they might also possess other advanced weapons. Before her team could respond, they spotted another projectile heading straight toward the house. A blinding explosion followed, engulfing the area in dark smoke and debris. Cao Taidi burst into laughter at the sight, commenting that the destruction was exhilarating. Tang Xiao, unfazed, turned to get into his car and told Cao to head to the next game location so they could continue their play with Haohan. Cao groaned that Haohan was probably blown to pieces, but Tang Xiao merely smiled and said that Haohan was far too tough to die so easily. Moments later, inside the wreckage, Haohan lay over Lin Fei, shielding her with his armor. Lin Fei looked around the ruined room and exhaled, remarking that they had narrowly escaped death. She stood up, furious, muttering that their enemies were getting too arrogant. Without hesitation, she stormed out and moments later kicked open the door to the president's office. The startled president looked up and asked if something was wrong. Lin Fei presented an arrest warrant and declared that the president was suspected of having direct ties to a terrorist attack, ordering her to come quietly. The president's colleagues immediately stood up in protest, but the president herself remained calm. She smirked and asked if Lin Fei really believed she could take her down with just a few men. Lin Fei tensed, preparing for a confrontation, but before things escalated, Haohan rushed into the office and urged them not to fight, warning that doing so would only play into the real culprit's hands. Lin Fei turned to him in confusion, wondering why he was there, while the president gave him a soft smile and asked if he believed she was innocent. Haohan returned a faint grin and said that if she had wanted him dead, she would have done it back at the banquet. The president's expression softened, and she agreed to go with Lin Fei, saying she would give him this favor. Haohan was left speechless by her words, while Lin Fei fumed internally, irritated that his presence had more influence than an official arrest warrant. News of Bao Panji's arrest spread rapidly across media channels, sparking widespread public outrage and speculation. Later, at the police station, Lin Fei interrogated the president about her involvement with the guild. The president maintained her composure and claimed she had no idea what Lin Fei was talking about. Lin Fei pressed further, asking why she had invited Haohan to the banquet. The president blushed slightly and replied that she admired him and simply wanted to have a deep conversation. Outside the interrogation room, the police director stood with Haohan and asked if he truly believed the president was innocent. Haohan explained that since she wanted him to join her guild, she had no reason to silence him, at least not yet. The director then asked who he suspected might be behind the attacks. Haohan replied that he wasn't concerned about who they were, but rather about why they were targeting him in the first place. At that moment, the president's secretary was about to open the office door when a shadow loomed behind her. Tang Xiao appeared silently, grabbed her from behind, and whispered menacingly, asking if the system capable of predicting the future was hidden inside the room. Haohan stood outside the interrogation room with the director, his expression tense as he admitted that he felt as though he had fallen straight into the enemy's trap. The director folded his arms thoughtfully and asked for Haohan's suggestion on what their next move should be. Haohan turned to leave, saying he would head to Bao Panji's company to keep an eye on her subordinates. But before he could finish his sentence, an officer burst into the room, panting heavily. The officer reported that the prison was under attack by superhumans and that their main targets were the high-security inmates. The prison guards were requesting immediate backup. The director's face darkened with anger at the audacity of anyone daring to raid a government prison. Haohan immediately deduced that the attackers were likely the same group who had targeted him earlier. Determined, he announced that he was going there right away. Before he could rush off, the director stopped him and mentioned that a special team had been prepared for him. Haohan looked confused as he hadn't been assigned any team until now. Moments later, a group of heavily armed men entered, the Quick Response Thunder Squad. The director explained that they were all top-level experts, each capable of taking on 10 men single-handedly. Furthermore, they were now equipped with special ability badges, enhancing their strength and agility. He then declared that from this moment on, Haohan would be their captain. Motivated and ready for battle, Haohan nodded and led the team out, rallying them to move quickly. At the prison, chaos reigned. Alarms blared as guards and inmates ran in all directions. One of the prisoners had grabbed a young female officer, ignoring her desperate struggle. But before he could harm her, a powerful punch sent him flying. Haohan stood tall in his armor, his commanding presence silencing the panic. He ordered his squad to apprehend every prisoner and to execute on the spot anyone who resisted. The Thunder Squad moved with precision, swiftly suppressing the chaos until the prisoners were rounded up and secured. A few moments later, the officers reported that the situation was under control and that they were still counting the number of escaped inmates. Haohan crossed his arms and asked about the superhuman attackers who had initiated the raid. The officer shook his head, explaining that there was no sign of them. They had vanished before the team even arrived. Haohan frowned, realizing that the entire incident had been nothing more than a diversion. Meanwhile, Tang Xiao sat comfortably in the president's office. The president's secretary was tied up in the corner, trembling with fear. Tang Xiao was on a call when his informant warned that Haohan was heading their way. Cao Taidi, standing beside him, panicked and shouted that they would be finished if Haohan caught them, urging Tang Xiao to flee immediately. Tang Xiao crushed the phone in his hand, his eyes cold with resolve. He muttered that this time he would make sure Haohan died without leaving a trace. Not long after, Haohan and Ren Junqi arrived near the president's office, riding on a massive flying bird named Qi. As they descended, Ren Junqi insisted on accompanying him. Haohan noticed the lifeless body of a security guard near the entrance and immediately sensed that something was wrong. They stepped inside cautiously, only to be greeted by Tang Xiao, who stood smirking in the middle of the room. He told Haohan that he had been waiting for him. Haohan froze in disbelief. He had personally killed Tang Xiao with his own hands. Tang Xiao only laughed and said that he had returned from the dead to reveal a truth. He was immortal, and Haohan could never kill him. Furious, Haohan lunged forward, declaring that he wouldn't kill him this time but would arrest him and lock him away instead. Ren Junqi followed close behind, but before they could reach him, Tang Xiao traced a glowing circle on the floor and dared them to escape it. Ren Junqi looked confused, unsure of what it was, and Haohan told her to charge through together. The moment they touched the edge of the circle, the world around them shifted and they were pulled into another dimension. Stunned, Haohan demanded an explanation from the system. The system calmly explained that Tang Xiao had used an S-class artifact known as illusion magic. Anyone trapped inside it would fall into a powerful illusion and remain there indefinitely unless the formation was broken from outside. Haohan asked if there was any possible way to escape. The system replied that while it would be hopeless for most people, there was still a small chance for him. He had to remove the first seal on Ren Junqi. Neither of them understood what that meant, so the system elaborated that it referred to achieving physical satisfaction to break the seal. Haohan stared at the system with an expression of disgust and disbelief. The system urgently displayed various instructions for Haohan, telling him that there was a way to break through the illusion, but it required a deep connection between him and Ren Junqi. Haohan grew frustrated and accused the system of trying to get him killed with such absurd suggestions. The system calmly explained that the process involved channeling energy resonance through emotional and spiritual synchronization, not something harmful. It assured him that if they succeeded, Ren Junqi's hidden potential would be unlocked, granting them a way out. Realizing they had no other choice, Haohan placed his hand on Ren Junqi's shoulder and told her that they had to work together to escape. Ren Junqi nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Both of them focused their energy, synchronizing their spiritual power. A bright aura surrounded them as the illusion began to tremble. Suddenly, the river water nearby took shape and formed into Ren Junqi's spirit form, glowing with intense light. Haohan stared in disbelief as the system announced that Ren Junqi's second form, her spirit form, had awakened. The spirit form released immense energy, breaking the illusion apart and forcing open a rift back to the real world. Outside, Tang Xiao smirked, expecting Haohan to still be trapped. But before he could react, a sudden explosion of light shattered his surroundings, and Haohan stepped out of the circle unharmed. Tang Xiao was stunned and questioned how he had broken the illusion. Haohan faced him and declared that it was time to end everything. Tang Xiao unleashed his A-class weapon, the twin wind blades, slashing toward Haohan. Haohan quickly realized his armor was being damaged and the system warned him that the blades could pierce through any defense. Acting fast, Haohan summoned Renjunki's spirit form, which transformed into a powerful weapon known as the Spirit Eye. Their weapons clashed, and in an instant, Tang Xiao's blades shattered into pieces under the Spirit Eye's force. Tang Xiao tried to flee, shocked by Haohan's growing strength, but tripped and fell to the ground. Haohan approached him and struck, ensuring he couldn't escape again. He demanded to know how Tang Xiao had come back to life before. Tang Xiao smiled darkly and whispered that he would find the answer in his next life. Before Haohan could react, Tang Xiao used his remaining power to trigger an explosion, engulfing the entire building in flames. Lin Fei, along with her team of officers, arrived at the president's building and began searching for Haohan amid the debris. Through the smoke and rubble, Haohan weakly raised his hand to signal his location. Once they reached him, he immediately told them to take Renjunki to the hospital, as she was lying unconscious on the ground. The officers quickly carried Renjunki away while Lin Fei stayed behind to assist Haohan. She helped him stand and asked how he had managed to survive such a powerful explosion unharmed. Haohan replied that Renjunki had saved him at the last moment, shielding him with her own body. Even in her final moments of consciousness, she had been worried about his safety. Lin Fei looked around at the destruction and remarked that the explosion was terrifying in scale, calling the attackers insane. Haohan told her that it was Tang Xiao's doing and that he was still alive. Lin Fei was surprised, wondering how that could be possible. Haohan explained that he had tried to capture Tang Xiao alive, but he had escaped using a fake death technique, and he might have already obtained Bao Panji's top-secret program. Without wasting a moment, Haohan and Lin Fei rushed to the president's office to check on the program. When they arrived, they found the secretary tied up in a corner. After freeing her, she revealed that it was Cao Taidi who had stolen the president's program. Lin Fei questioned her about the whereabouts of the guild members and how the enemies had managed to invade so easily. The secretary confessed that the guild members had betrayed them for money, defecting to Cao Taidi's side. Meanwhile, Tang Xiao landed in an isolated area after escaping from the president's building. His phone fell a short distance away, and as it started ringing, he walked over to pick it up. The caller was Cao Taidi, demanding to know his location. A few minutes later, they met face to face. Cao Taidi angrily accused Tang Xiao of trying to get him killed, reminding him that he had promised to help capture Bao Panji but instead blew up the entire building. Tang Xiao dismissed his accusations and coldly asked about the USB drive he had requested earlier. Realizing he was being ignored, Cao Taidi warned that he would not let Tang Xiao cause any more chaos. Behind Tang Xiao, an entire squad of armed men appeared. Cao Taidi's hired mercenaries. Cao Taidi smirked and announced that the men Tang Xiao had helped him recruit would now be the ones to eliminate him. Tang Xiao looked at them with disdain and asked if they really believed they could take him down. Cao Taidi offered a bounty of 3 million to whoever killed him. The mercenaries immediately charged, but Tang Xiao activated his A-class equipment, Nightshade. In a flash of darkness and blinding speed, he cut through their throats effortlessly, slaughtering them all within seconds. Back at the president's office, the president was furious upon learning that her secret program had been stolen. Haohan warned that if the enemies managed to predict the next descent and locate resource-rich zones, the entire world would be in danger. He suggested shutting the program down remotely, but the president explained that the system was isolated from any network, making remote access impossible. Lin Fei proposed creating a new version of the program so they could track the descents themselves and perhaps capture the invaders all at once. The president considered the idea, but said they couldn't do it without the original data, which had been destroyed, and that collecting new data could take months. Haohan then smiled and told her she didn't need to collect new data. He opened the system interface and explained that she could ask it for whatever information she needed. Curious, the president asked what it was. Haohan replied that it was difficult to explain, but in simple terms, it was a self-evolving artificial intelligence, the very developer of the game. The president was stunned, realizing the game's creator had been an AI all along. Haohan turned to the system and asked if it could provide the data the president required. The system confidently responded that it could, but only if Haohan and two of the girls performed a synchronization ritual together. Haohan froze, staring at the screen with a bewildered expression as Lin Fei looked at him in confusion. Cao Taidi and his men were stunned by how Tang Xiao had managed to defeat half of their force on his own. Tang Xiao provoked the remaining men, daring them to keep attacking and not to lose their courage. As he fought, he realized that his strength increased with every opponent he defeated. He looked almost bored and declared that he had killed enough for the day and was tired, but if anyone still wanted to join him, it was not too late. He told them that those who chose to submit to him would have the freedom to do whatever they wanted in this world. One by one, the men knelt and pledged their loyalty to him. Tang Xiao smirked and commented that with so many followers, money would soon become an issue. He turned to Cao Taidi and reminded him that he had claimed to be rich earlier. Cao panicked and confessed that his family's finances were not as great as he had implied. Tang Xiao coldly ordered him to call his father and demand 300 million or be ready to face the consequences. Terrified, Cao Taidi ran off, but Tang Xiao ordered his men to bring him back. As they chased him down, Tang Xiao smiled darkly, remarking that with wealth and the stolen program in his hands, the world was already within his grasp. He warned Haohan to prepare himself because his time was running out. Meanwhile, at a discreet hotel, the president, Bao, sat with Lin Fei while Haohan stepped out from the shower. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with tension. Lin Fei, noticing Haohan's presence, turned away and pretended to sleep. Haohan told the president that she still had time to change her mind, but she remained resolute. She explained that reclaiming what was lost was the only way forward, and then excused herself to freshen up. The system chimed in cheerfully, commenting that the upcoming task was crucial for gathering data and urged Haohan to stay focused. Annoyed, he snapped at it, saying there was no system more inappropriate than this one. The system replied in its usual smug tone, implying that not everything happening was against anyone's will, leaving Haohan confused and frustrated. Just then, Lin Fei tossed a shoe at the system's screen and grumbled that if they didn't quiet down, she would personally deal with them. The system joked that she was only pretending to be indifferent. The president returned, her demeanor softer than before. She looked at Haohan and admitted that she respected his calmness and confidence, qualities she rarely found in others. Unlike those who only saw her status or beauty, he treated her like an equal. Haohan smiled modestly and admitted that he wasn't ignoring her. He just took time to understand people. The president smiled at his sincerity, and the tension in the room shifted into mutual respect and quiet understanding as Lin Fei lay pretending to sleep, hiding her own thoughts beneath a calm exterior. Lin Fei had been the center of attention from the moment she entered the police academy. Many people pursued her, but she could never be with a weak man who lacked the strength to conquer her heart. Later, she joined the Special Service Bureau with top scores, and even fewer people dared to approach her, except for that playboy Tang Xiao, who clearly had ill intentions. When she first met Haohan, she had assumed he was just an ordinary loser, but as time went on, his actions made her believe that he might actually be her true soulmate. Yet now, as she lay on the other side of the bed, while the president and Haohan were having fun, she realized that her so-called soulmate was with another woman. The president complained that she couldn't take it any longer, but Haohan told her that there was still time. The president asked Lin Fei for help, but Lin Fei sat up and called them shameless, saying she was not like them. However, when she saw the situation, she eventually agreed to help because Bao couldn't hold on any longer. She told them to stop being dramatic, removed her clothes, and instructed the president to move aside so she could take over. The president sighed in relief, finally able to rest, while Lin Fei challenged Haohan to show her what he was capable of. When he entered her, she felt as if she were riding a wild horse, wincing from the pain and asking him to go slowly. Eventually, she adjusted and realized that the strange experience held a strange kind of beauty. A few moments later, Haohan looked at the system and asked if it was satisfied now, but he noticed the screen malfunctioning and wondered if the system had missed the entire scene. Both women sat on the bed, covering themselves when Lin Fei asked what was going on. Then, the system finally responded, saying that it was fine. The previous data had simply been too abundant and rich, and as a result, it had evolved. Haohan stared at the screen in disbelief as he saw that the system had taken the form of a woman. The system ignored him and stated that it would send the collected data to them so they could begin building the program. Lin Fei suggested that the system should predict the occurrence of the next descent, but the president explained that it would take time. Haohan, however, said there was no need as the descent had already begun. He pointed to the light pillars visible through the window and urged them to locate the resource-rich area quickly so they could catch Tang Xiao. Haohan stood by the window and realized that the descent had already begun when Lin Fei came beside him and asked if they still had time. Meanwhile, the President Bao announced that she had located the nearest resource-rich point. Both Haohan and Lin Fei sat beside her as Lin Fei remarked that Tang Xiao definitely hadn't left the city, meaning he wouldn't miss the resource point. Bao, however, commented that they had already lost the initiative and that by the time they arrived, it might be too late. Then she smiled and revealed that she happened to have one transportation item. Moments later, the three of them arrived at the resource-rich area, which turned out to be the Yihao Grand Hotel. As they were being transported directly to the hotel, Haohan asked Bao how she had obtained such a high-level item. Blushing, she explained that she had kept a few valuable items since she once managed a large guild, and with this, they would reach the location before Tang Xiao and could wait for him to walk right into their trap. Lin Fei suddenly noticed something on the ground and pointed out that they were already a step too late. She said Tang Xiao's group had already entered, and it wasn't just one team because there had been a fierce battle moments ago. She pointed toward the bloodstains on the floor and noted that something had dragged the bodies inside. Haohan looked at the blood and wondered if it was Tang Xiao's doing again, but Lin Fei replied that it didn't seem like a human's work. It looked more like the attack of a ferocious beast. Gritting his teeth, Haohan decided they should push forward and see what was happening inside. Moments later, the three of them entered the hotel. The president looked around and asked why no one was there and why the lights were off. Lin Fei observed the surroundings and said the place must have been destroyed by someone, suggesting they call for backup. Haohan disagreed, saying they didn't have time and urged them to go upstairs and investigate. As they moved, Haohan suddenly turned and said he had heard something. The next moment, all three of them heard someone shouting, so they rushed to the second floor. From a distance, they saw a man firing his gun at something, but they couldn't clearly see what it was. Then, in an instant, a shadowy figure attacked the man. Haohan couldn't make out what the creature was until he heard Bao screaming behind him. He turned to see a giant spider lunging toward her. Before it could reach her, Haohan unleashed a blood dragon punch, killing the creature instantly. He asked Bao if she was all right, but she pointed behind him in horror. When he turned around, they saw a massive swarm of spider monsters rushing toward them. Lin Fei asked what they should do, and Haohan shouted that they had no choice but to run. On his signal, all three of them bolted down the hallway. Spotting a room ahead, Haohan told them to hide inside, but the door was locked and wouldn't budge. He ordered the girls to move aside and then kicked the door open, sending 2 men flying to the ground behind it. As he entered, he saw several more men hiding inside. The men shouted that they had just managed to escape and now Haohan had brought the spider monsters back to them. Realizing his mistake, Haohan panicked and quickly apologized. The president and Lin Fei rushed into the room and the president shouted for the door to be closed, but Lin Fei warned that it was already too late. The president quickly turned around and activated her supernatural item, unleashing a powerful blast that destroyed the approaching spider monster. With the threat gone for the moment, they managed to shut the door and took a collective sigh of relief, only to turn around and find an army of men inside, their weapons pointed directly at Haohan. Haohan gave a crooked smile and remarked that the situation inside was even worse than outside. Lin Fei raised her gun and ordered them to put their hands up, declaring that they were under police authority. Haohan tried to calm the men down, explaining that they were there to help and asked if they were part of the hotel staff. One of the men gritted his teeth and said the hotel staff had already been killed. Haohan was taken aback and asked if Tang Xiao had also come. The men exchanged surprised glances and demanded to know how Haohan knew their boss. Smirking, Haohan said he had guessed correctly. They were Tang Xiao's people. He called Tang Xiao a trickster who didn't dare to show himself and instead sent his men to do his work. Angered by his words, the men warned Haohan not to move or they would shoot. Haohan calmly replied that if they did, he would open the door and let the monsters inside. Even Lin Fei and the president were startled by his threat. One of the men tried to sound confident, telling his teammates not to panic because Haohan was bluffing. If the monsters came in, they would all die first and he wouldn't dare to take that risk. Haohan shrugged and said he didn't mind mutual destruction as they were prepared to be heroes anyway. He began to count to 3, threatening to open the door if they didn't surrender. One of the men sneered that he wouldn't dare, so Haohan suggested skipping the count and opening the door right away. The moment he said that, panic spread through the group and they immediately lowered their weapons and surrendered. Lin Fei and the president exhaled in relief while Haohan chuckled, saying he had actually thought they were tougher than that. A few moments later, all the men were tied up and their leader was being interrogated by Haohan. The leader explained that his boss had sent him with 20 men to the hotel 2 hours earlier, claiming there were top resources to be collected, but as soon as they entered, they were ambushed by endless waves of spider monsters. One by one, his men were killed. Haohan asked where Tang Xiao was now, but the leader looked down and said he didn't know. As soon as he said that, Haohan ordered the girls to open the door. He dragged the man toward it, preparing to throw him out, when the man suddenly shouted that Tang Xiao was in Meli Mountain and planned to establish his main base there. Haohan released him and said that it was indeed a perfect hiding spot, suggesting they head there to find him. Lin Fei hesitated and asked how they were supposed to get out of the room since they had seen how strong and deadly those spider monsters were. One mistake could cost them their lives. Haohan replied that if the creatures were beasts, then they must be afraid of fire. Standing behind the door, he summoned his supernatural power and blasted it open, sending a wave of fire that scattered the spiders outside. Stepping through the flames, Haohan saw the spiders retreating into the shadows. The girls followed him, amazed that it had actually worked and that the creatures had moved so far away. Just as Haohan took a step forward to leave, a shadow loomed behind him. The Spider Queen lunged and drove her massive stinger straight through his body. Blood gushed out instantly as she lifted him into the air, her stinger still embedded in him. Haohan felt the poison spreading rapidly, his limbs growing numb. When he turned his head, he saw the Spider Queen grinning at him, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she hissed that she had finally caught him. In that moment, Haohan could only think to himself in disbelief. Was she the third girl now? Lin Fei aimed her gun at the Spider Queen and told Haohan not to be afraid, assuring him that she was there to help. The Spider Queen, in a calm yet chilling tone, told them not to worry, as she had no intention of killing him. As long as they agreed to help her with something, she would let him go. She demanded that they bring her another 500 humans, promising to release him once she was satisfied. Haohan scoffed and told her to find them herself, which enraged her. With a sharp jerk of her body, she caused him immense pain and ordered him to keep quiet. Lin Fei quickly agreed to the queen's demand and asked her to put Haohan down first, while the president tried to reason with her, suggesting they talk things out peacefully. The Spider Queen ignored them and turned away, still holding Haohan captive. She warned them to hurry, saying that if she didn't see the people she wanted within an hour, Haohan would be rendered impotent for life, and 3 hours later, he would die. Panicked, both women turned to leave but noticed that the spiders had cleared a path for them. Lin Fei commented that it was probably meant for their exit. Without wasting a second, they rushed toward the exit. Lin Fei said she would head to the station to call for backup and instructed the president to go to the hospital and find Zhu Liu, who was caring for Ren Junki. As they ran, Tang Xiao's men saw them escaping and tried to follow, but before they could reach the exit, an army of spiders swarmed toward them, tearing through their ranks mercilessly. A while later, Haohan regained control of his body and realized he was bound within the spider's lair. Tang Xiao's surviving subordinates were also trapped beside him. In front of him, the Spider Queen killed a man effortlessly and immediately produced hundreds of offspring. Disgusted, Haohan asked if all those spiders were her children. The queen turned around, laughing darkly. She said she would spare his life for now so he could witness her creation, and added that once the two women brought her the humans she wanted, she would turn him into food for her children. Haohan smirked and remarked that he had mistaken her for a third intruder, but realized she was just obsessed with reproducing. The Spider Queen grew furious and declared that if he was so eager to die, she would gladly grant his wish. Haohan mocked her further, saying she was forcing others to deceive and lure people for her because she was afraid of sunlight. The color drained from her face, and she asked how he knew that. Realizing he had guessed correctly, Haohan explained that she had chosen this place to build her nest because she knew the rare items would attract a constant stream of humans. He then taunted her to reveal the location of the top-tier items, claiming he wouldn't last much longer in his current state. Enraged, the Spider Queen lunged at him, intending to stab him with her stinger, but as she struck, Haohan unleashed his supernatural power and shattered it completely. The queen recoiled in shock, demanding to know how he had recovered so quickly since her venom should have paralyzed him. Haohan told her that the poison had worked before, but now he had become a poison type himself after using the iced heart pill's attribute. The queen stared at him in disbelief, admitting that she hadn't expected him to have such a backup plan, but she hissed that even if he was immune to poison, she could still kill him. She commanded her offspring to tear him apart. Haohan knew that although he had neutralized the toxins, he didn't have a move specifically suited for dealing with poison-type attacks. With no better option, he decided to draw a card. Looking up at the invisible interface, he muttered to the system not to fail him this time, reminding it that he had even allowed her to enjoy a good scene earlier, and if he died now, she wouldn't get to see anything more. He flipped the card, and his expression changed instantly. Haohan flipped the card and frowned when he saw that it was a girly card with no attribute written on it. The girl on the card looked oddly familiar, resembling the system itself. He thought that if the card wasn't fully summoned, he could still put it back and choose another one. Just as he tried to return it, a puff of smoke appeared before him, and the girl materialized in real life. She smiled brightly and congratulated him for drawing a super rare card, saying that from now on he would be able to see her without any electronic device. Haohan sighed in disappointment and told her to go back. clearly unimpressed. Before they could argue further, the Spider Queen, irritated by their casual conversation, lunged forward to attack. Haohan reacted quickly, dodging her strike and pulling the system girl out of harm's way. Realizing he had no other choice, Haohan muttered that the system was better than nothing and asked what skills she had that could help him take down the Spider Queen. The system replied that her level wasn't high enough to create weapons, but she could manage to summon some common items: a violin made from dragon tendons, a jade bed carved entirely from jade, and a cloak woven from the feathers of a mythical bird. The color drained from Haohan's face, and he asked if she was joking. The Spider Queen burst into laughter, mocking them and saying she had never seen such a ridiculous pair before. Frustrated, Haohan shouted at the system, asking if she had anything useful for battle. The system calmly replied that she could only create items with 0 attack power. Haohan groaned and asked if she had a transportation tool like the one Bao had used. The system said she would search for it, but questioned if he was planning to run away. Haohan told her to hurry up and find it, while the Spider Queen, now in a raging fury, activated her super berserk mode and roared that she would tear them into pieces. Haohan warned the system that he couldn't hold on much longer and told her to let him know the moment she found it. The Spider Queen charged at him again, and Haohan summoned a protective circle around himself and the system. He could feel the immense force of her blows shaking the barrier, and wondered how many people she had devoured to gain such power. Cracks began to form on the shield, and with one powerful strike, the Queen managed to shatter it. Her punch missed him by inches, but her follow-up kick sent him crashing to the ground, shattering his armor. Just as the Queen prepared for the final blow, the system called out that she had found what she was searching for and threw the item to him. Haohan caught it, but before he could use it, the Spider Queen ensnared him in her web, binding him tightly. Struggling to breathe, Haohan threw the item upward and used his power to propel it higher. The Spider Queen scoffed at his effort, calling it childish and futile, saying that he could barely move and his escape attempt was meaningless. Haohan smirked weakly and replied that he wasn't running away, he was bringing help from outside. The Queen followed his gaze upward and suddenly realized the ceiling above had cracked open. A beam of sunlight broke through and spilled over her body. Screeching in agony, she began to burn as the sunlight consumed her. Haohan made no move to free himself, simply watching her writhe in pain. She understood then that he could have broken free at any time, but chose to keep still to trap her under the sun. Haohan confirmed her thought, telling her that he had only been stalling for time. Desperate, the Spider Queen begged for her life, promising to serve him faithfully if he spared her. Haohan replied that he appreciated the offer, but found it unnecessary. The system urged him to finish her off without wasting time asking about the rare items, but Haohan told her not to rush. The items weren't going anywhere, and there were more important things to handle first. A moment later, his attribute panel appeared before him, congratulating him on leveling up twice. Haohan frowned and asked the system if she had noticed anything strange. The system seemed confused and said she didn't understand what he meant. Haohan explained that this time the system hadn't announced him as the first to reach level 5. That meant someone else had beaten him to it, and if that person was Tang Xiao, it could spell serious trouble ahead. Haohan came running toward the hall of the hotel, where he saw Lin Fi arriving with a few officers. Without stopping, he informed her that the spider monsters had been dealt with and that he was going after Tang Xiao. He advised her to seal off the building and search for the items. Lin Fi insisted on accompanying him, but Haohan stopped her, explaining that too many people would only draw attention. She smiled, saying she knew he wouldn't be taken down so easily. Just then, one of the officers shouted that someone was upstairs. They opened fire, but the target escaped. Lin Fi ordered her team to follow, determined not to let them get away, though she couldn't help but wonder if Tang Xiao's people were still inside the building and had already taken the items. Later, the scene shifted to Melly Mountain. A car drove along a narrow road with Tang Xiao's men inside. They laughed among themselves, pleased that their boss had been right about the item being on the bridge. As they talked, something suddenly landed on the roof of their car. One of the men asked what it was, but another dismissed it as a branch. They had no idea that it was not a branch, but Haohan sitting quietly on top of their car. A few moments later, they arrived at their destination. The men wondered why their boss had chosen such a remote place for their headquarters. Another man approached and asked how things had gone. One of the men replied that there were a total of 18 items and all had been secured. He also asked if they were the last ones to return. They explained that the team sent to the hotel was still out of contact, likely due to a poor signal on the road. When asked about their boss, the man replied that he was probably resting and that they would call him once everyone had arrived. Haohan, still hiding under the car, listened to their conversation carefully. He realized that Tang Xiao had gathered a large number of people in just a few days, making it dangerous to act recklessly. He needed a careful plan to find him. Soon, two more men approached, and Haohan noticed that one of them was Cao Taidi, who was crying about losing all his money but still being forced to stay. The other man warned him to stop whining unless he wanted to die. At that moment, Haohan suddenly grabbed the man and knocked him unconscious. When Cao Taidi turned around, he was shocked to see Haohan standing there, holding the unconscious man. Overjoyed, Cao Taidi shouted his name, but Haohan quickly covered his mouth and warned him to stay quiet. A short while later, Haohan tied the unconscious man to a tree, while Cao Taidi praised him for being a true hero who had come to rescue him. Haohan dismissed the compliment and told him to get dressed, saying that saving him was purely accidental. Cao Taidi then commented that everything seemed clear, so they should leave. He asked Haohan where his car was, and Haohan turned to him and asked which car he was talking about. Shocked, Cao Taidi asked if he hadn't driven there, insisting that he wasn't ready to walk down a mountain. Haohan smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. He then asked if Cao Taidi knew which room Tang Xiao was in, because they would need to steal a car to escape. A few moments later, Cao Taidi and Haohan arrived at Tang Xiao's building. Haohan had changed into different clothes and wore a cap to cover his face. The guard outside asked why they had taken so long. Haohan replied that Cao Taidi had delayed them, and the guard instructed him to take Cao Taidi upstairs and keep a close watch on him. Once inside, Cao Taidi pointed toward a room, saying it was Tang Xiao's. Haohan told him to wait there and moved ahead. Cao Taidi urged him to hurry, warning that there were dozens of people inside the building. Haohan quietly unlocked the door and entered. He sighed in relief, but then noticed a girl carrying the items on a plate. Haohan remarked that he hadn't expected such generosity from Tang Xiao. The girl laughed and told him he was funny, saying that she couldn't let him take them so easily. Her nails began to grow longer, and she warned that he would have to defeat her first if he wanted the items. Haohan wondered how her hands could still change like that. The system appeared behind him and explained that she was a mutant from the game with a mutation ability. Haohan asked if her game really had such strong inclusivity, as he had always thought it was just about cultivation. The system smiled and said there was much more to it than he could imagine. Before they could continue, the mutant interrupted and told him to stop chatting, rushing toward him in attack. Haohan dodged her strikes effortlessly and asked if she could at least tell him where Tang Xiao had run off to. The mutant grew angrier with every move, shouting that he would find out once he was dead. Haohan smirked and provoked her further, commenting that the girls in the game were really stubborn. The system watched from a distance, realizing that Haohan could dodge her fierce attacks so easily even without any equipment or medicine. She noted that his character attributes had clearly evolved. Meanwhile, Haohan teased the mutant again, suggesting she should move faster because she was too slow. Furious, the mutant asked if he was ready to take her next move. Haohan grinned, eager to see what new trick she had. She clicked her tongue, which then extended like a sharp sting. Haohan looked disgusted and muttered that he could not even look at her properly anymore. The mutant spoke again, and Haohan was shocked to realize that she was talking, even though her mouth was distorted. Then he noticed the voice was coming from another mouth below. Annoyed by his constant commentary, the mutant rushed at him again. This time, her speed increased dramatically, and she managed to tear his clothes. She was impressed that he had still dodged her attack, but she immediately lunged at him once more. The system, alarmed by her speed, asked Haohan how he planned to dodge her next move, warning that if she struck, her body could shatter from the force. The system urged him to retreat and stop trying to play the hero. As the mutant was about to reach him, Haohan suddenly activated his Azure Dragon armor, causing her sting to snap in half. The impact sent her crashing to the ground, unconscious. Haohan stood tall with his arms crossed and calmly remarked that she was fast, but he was tougher. The system, clearly pleased, realized that Haohan had deliberately waited for her to attack so he could use the armor to counter her move at the perfect moment. Haohan agreed, saying that if he had activated it earlier, she would have been alert and cautious. Just then, he heard noises outside and commented that their fight had been too loud, probably alerting everyone nearby. He stepped out to see what was happening, finding Cao Taidi, who exclaimed that he had finally made it out and that it seemed like the police had arrived. As they talked, Lin Fei came rushing toward them. Haohan frowned and reminded her that he had told her to seal off the hotel, asking why she was there. Lin Fei, slightly out of breath, explained that someone had stolen all the items from the hotel and she had chased them to this place. She asked if he had seen anyone suspicious, but before he could respond, they heard a door click open nearby. Realizing someone was inside, they rushed toward the room while Cao Taidi groaned in frustration, wondering if the chaos would ever end. Haohan pushed the door open and saw someone about to jump out of the window. He quickly used his supernatural power to stop them and ordered them to leave the stolen items behind. As he moved in to strike, he realized it was a girl. Sighing, he remarked that he had already dealt with 2 girls that night, so one more made no difference. The girl smiled and said that he had caught her, just as she had expected from the man she admired. Haohan was taken aback by her words, and at that moment, Lin Fei entered the room, pointing her gun at the girl. The girl blushed and introduced herself as Lola Jenkins, declaring that she was there specifically to marry Haohan. Haohan was confused by her name and mistakenly called her Loli. She immediately scolded him, saying that only her future husband was allowed to call her that. Lin Fei grew irritated, grabbed her by the arm, and accused her of lying. She demanded to know why Lola had stolen the items and whether she was working with Tang Xiao. Lola replied that she had stolen something from her dream man to prove she was worthy of him, explaining that it was a tradition in her thief clan. Haohan couldn't make sense of what she was saying. Lola went on to explain that the thief clan lived in the Valley of Wind and consisted of 300 to 400 members who specialized in theft and had developed their own unique culture. Though they were not strong in direct combat, they excelled in stealth, tracking, and gathering intelligence. Haohan stopped Lin Fei and took control of the situation. He asked Lola about this so-called marriage test. Lola explained that he was the hope of their clan, the one destined to defeat the Demon King and free them from his rule. She said she wanted to marry him so she could ask him to fulfill that destiny. Haohan smiled and told her that he could help her without marrying her, but before he could finish speaking, she punched him in the face. She declared that his offer meant nothing because her clan did not accept help from outsiders unless it came through marriage. Haohan sighed and suggested that they leave first and talk about it later. Lola jumped in excitement, saying her clan was finally saved. She added that her father had wanted to marry her off to the Demon King for peace, but she would rather marry a hero. Haohan, surprised, asked if she had run away from her wedding. No one noticed that a small statue in the room contained a hidden camera. Lola admitted that she had indeed run away because she refused to become the Demon King's wife. Haohan asked if she wasn't afraid that the Demon King would retaliate and kill her family, but she boldly stated that she would take Haohan back with her to avenge them. Haohan commented that she was truly filial and asked whether the Demon King was really that powerful. Lola replied that he was incredibly strong and that no one in her clan could possibly defeat him. Unbeknownst to them, their entire conversation was being watched by Tang Xiao through the secret camera. He listened carefully, deep in thought about the Demon King, when a woman approached him from behind and touched his shoulder. She sat in front of him and asked who he found most interesting. Tang Xiao grabbed her chin and replied that it was definitely her. A few moments later, Haohan and the others returned home. He introduced Renjunki and the princess of the Northern Wind Empire, Ju Liu, to Lola. Overjoyed, Lola introduced herself as Haohan's fiancée, Lola Jenkins. Haohan rubbed his forehead in frustration as both Renjunki and Ju Liu looked at him in confusion, asking how this had happened. Lola, seeing their puzzled expressions, asked if they didn't know that she and Haohan had already decided to get married. Haohan panicked and told her to stop making things up. Lola then asked if they were planning to fight her for Haohan. Both of them, annoyed, agreed to fight for the right to be with him, while Haohan silently walked away, too exhausted to argue. Meanwhile, Lin Fei warned them that if they destroyed the safe house again, they would all be sleeping on the streets. Haohan looked utterly drained and told them to go ahead and destroy everything if they wanted. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was the president calling. He answered and asked how the program was progressing. She informed him that she had extracted the game's back-end data but couldn't find any record of the mutant, which meant she hadn't entered through the usual channels. Haohan asked if it was possible that Tang Xiao had found a way to open a dark portal. The president explained that theoretically he could summon any character from the game into the real world, and if that was the case, he would certainly continue making moves. Haohan ended the call, lay back on the bed, and muttered that Tang Xiao was truly a troublesome opponent. He wondered how on earth he was managing to do all of this. Elsewhere, Tang Xiao was in a lab with several professors conducting an experiment. He asked the lead professor how the progress was going. The professor replied that they were almost successful and that the person who had created the software was a genius, as it could locate characters in the game dimension and even pull them into reality with minor adjustments. Suddenly, he pressed a button and chaos erupted in the lab. Machines sparked, alarms blared, and then the Demon King appeared before them. The Demon King's voice boomed as he demanded to know who had summoned him. Tang Xiao knelt before him and said that he was the one who had called him, claiming that he knew where the Demon King's runaway fiancée was and that she had already found someone to oppose him. Tang Xiao smirked and suggested that they join forces. The next morning, Haohan was in a deep sleep when strange noises woke him up. He stretched lazily and wondered what was making such a racket so early. Meanwhile, Cao Taidi had arrived at his house and was completely mesmerized by the beautiful women standing before him. As he stared at Ju Liu, Ren Junki, and Lola Jenkins, he thought they looked like goddesses. Moments later, Haohan stepped out of his room, yawning, and asked what was going on and if someone was getting married. The girls pointed at Cao Taidi and said that he was looking for him. They asked if he knew him. Haohan blinked a few times, fully opening his eyes, only to find Cao Taidi clinging to his leg and crying. Cao Taidi tearfully apologized, saying he had offended and ignored him in the past, begging Haohan not to take it to heart. Haohan shouted at him, telling him not to act like they were close. Cao Taidi bowed deeply and declared that from now on he would follow Haohan's lead as he owed him his life. Ignoring him, Haohan turned to leave, but Ren Junki stopped him, insisting he have breakfast first. He replied that he had lost his appetite. As they were heading back inside, Cao Taidi stopped them, claiming that he had important information to report. A few moments later, everyone sat in the hall, Haohan and the girls on one side, Cao Taidi on the other. Haohan gestured for him to speak. Cao Taidi composed himself and explained that when Tang Xiao had imprisoned him, he saw a professor who had also been captured. Haohan asked if he knew the professor's name, but Cao Taidi said he only knew that the man looked scholarly and that Tang Xiao seemed to be forcing him to create something. Not long after, Haohan and President Bao Panji began investigating the professor Cao Taidi had mentioned. Bao reported that a professor named Austin Frost, a leading expert in quantum mechanics from Galland University, had gone missing 3 days earlier and was still unaccounted for. They realized that Tang Xiao must have been behind the abduction. Haohan wondered aloud what Tang Xiao wanted from the professor, and Bao replied that it was nothing good. She added that she could monitor quantum fluctuations, which would reveal traces of their activity if they were working on something significant. While Bao spoke, Haohan found himself distracted, his eyes lingering on her figure. Bao suddenly turned toward him and said she had a gift for him. Caught off guard, Haohan blushed, and Bao asked why he was turning red. He stammered, claiming it was just too hot in the room. Bao turned away to fetch the gift, while Haohan, watching her, found his heart racing. Even after all their serious discussions, he couldn't help feeling flustered around her. With her back still turned, Bao commented that she didn't dare leave important things lying around, especially after what had happened last time with the program. Haohan flushed deeper, realizing he had been too forward back then and should have handled things more carefully. When Bao finally turned around, she handed him a sleek bracelet, telling him to put it on. Haohan slipped it onto his wrist and asked how to use it. Bao told him to click it and see for himself. As he did, the bracelet lit up. She explained that it was a virtual tool bracelet she had developed capable of digitizing and storing summoned items and badges, allowing him to access them whenever needed. Haohan's eyes lit up with excitement, and he commented that it was impressive and incredibly useful for time-sensitive missions. Bao nodded and told him that she and Lin Fei had agreed to focus their resources on him to deal with Tang Xiao. She added that Lin Fei had gone to speak with the chief and would soon bring over the newly collected equipment and badges. Meanwhile, Lin Fei was at the department, slamming her hands on the table in frustration. She demanded to know why the chief refused to hand over the equipment and badges. The chief calmly explained that the items were temporarily stored at the Secret Service and that he had no authority to release them. Lin Fei snapped, asking if they were planning to let the items sit there collecting dust or wait until Tang Xiao stole them again. The chief sighed and said that the mayor had instructed them to allocate resources to someone who was determined, morally upright, considerate of elders and children, and devoted to protecting the citizens. As the city's leader, he had to comply. Lin Fei rolled her eyes and retorted that he was clearly talking about himself. At the same time, the mayor, Stephen Black, was speaking with his son at home. He told his son that he had obtained everything he needed and that the rest was up to him. His son, Eddie Black, one of Lakeside City's 10 outstanding youths, a mayor's medal recipient, and the champion of the citywide student essay competition, confidently told his father that he would twist Tang Xiao's head off tomorrow. The mayor chuckled and said that even the Secret Service couldn't find Tang Xiao, yet his son thought he could kill him the next day. He asked if Eddie was joking. Eddie, looking slightly embarrassed, asked his father for advice. The mayor leaned forward and told him that Tang Xiao and Haohan were known to be mortal enemies, so using Haohan as bait would surely lure Tang Xiao out. The next morning, Haohan and Lin Fei arrived at the stadium after receiving a call from Eddie Black. Haohan wondered why Eddie had called him there, while Lin Fei, already in a bad mood, cursed Eddie and complained that he probably wanted Haohan to teach him how to use the items properly. Haohan asked if Eddie was suddenly so passionate about studying. On the other end of the call, Eddie held a sword in his hand and caused several holes in the ground. After ending the call, he greeted Haohan warmly and called him their hero. Haohan felt awkward but reached out to shake his hand. Eddie smiled and praised Haohan as the most reliable guardian of their city, deserving of the highest compliments. Haohan felt flattered but uncomfortable, while Lin Fei silently questioned Eddie Black's intentions. Eddie explained that he had little talent and experience, and being entrusted with such a great responsibility made him nervous. That was why he wanted Haohan's help to improve himself. Haohan asked if he was sure about getting personally involved since the fight wasn't a game but deadly serious. Eddie arrogantly replied that he was chosen for this major role with the people's support and was ready to sacrifice his life for the country. He began acting like a politician, but Haohan and Lin Fei soon realized that it was nothing more than a publicity stunt when they noticed the paparazzi nearby. Eddie instructed his staff to process the footage quickly and send it to the TV station in time for the evening's prime broadcast. The paparazzi became excited and rushed off. Haohan gave an awkward smile and commented that Mr. Black truly paid attention to detail, then suggested they begin the lesson, mentioning that he had some experience to share. Before he could continue, Eddie's men rushed forward carrying a chair and a bottle. Eddie sat down immediately as his men poured him a drink, complaining that it was exhausting to stand for so long and that he hadn't wanted to take on this responsibility in the first place. Lin Fei angrily told him to stop pretending to be innocent while enjoying the perks. She accused him of forcing his way into the national selection process for elite fighters because he thought there was profit to be made or insider news that the final selections would be made by top leaders. She said once selected, it would become his ticket to fame and fortune. Eddie calmly took a sip of his drink and told her she was mistaken. He had no interest in joining the national team and would never have gotten involved if his father hadn't pressured him. He paused, then added that he had discovered Tang Xiao's location. Haohan was surprised by the information. Eddie raised a paper and explained that he had connections in both the underworld and the legal world, so finding someone wasn't difficult. He suggested that Haohan take care of Tang Xiao quickly, but Haohan questioned why Eddie hadn't caught him himself. Eddie replied that the risk was too great and unnecessary for him to take, and besides, if Haohan handled it, his father wouldn't blame him since he was still getting used to combat mode and not yet officially in position. Lin Fei asked if the information was reliable. Eddie looked serious and said that if it turned out to be false, she could find him anytime and he would repay her with his life. Lin Fei told Haohan to go and said she would contact headquarters for backup. Haohan quickly turned to leave but told her not to call for backup as it would only alert the enemy. He suggested going there directly instead. After they left, Eddie told his men that the detention center could now proceed with their plan. A few moments later, Haohan and Lin Fei arrived at the suburban abandoned water plant following Eddie Black's information and waited in their car. Haohan lay back casually and said there was no need to rush. He wanted to see what Eddie was really up to. Lin Fei didn't understand what he meant. Haohan explained that someone who cared so much about self-promotion wouldn't let him capture Tang Xiao so easily, and that Eddie's long speech had only been to lure him there. Lin Fei shouted at him for playing along so well when he had already sensed something was wrong. Haohan suggested they put on a show since Eddie wanted to play games and said he probably intended to use him as bait to draw Tang Xiao out. What interested him was how Eddie would send his location to Tang Xiao. Just then, Lin Fei received a call from the detention center. The caller reported that there had been a power failure, the surveillance systems were down, and several suspects had escaped. They also informed her that the people she had arrested at Melly Mountain 2 days earlier were now missing. Haohan realized that Eddie had used these escaped criminals to pass messages. Lin Fei immediately ordered them to organize manpower and search the entire city. Meanwhile, the escaped suspects arrived at Tang Xiao's hideout. One of them told Tang Xiao that the detention center was in chaos, so everyone had tried to escape and they had taken the opportunity to flee as as well. They pleaded with Tang Xiao to give them another chance to stay and work for him. The man standing beside Tang Xiao said he had checked and confirmed that they hadn't brought any tales, and since the police were arresting people all over the city, it was unlikely they had been released intentionally. Tang Xiao finally spoke and asked if they were saying that Haohan was hiding at the abandoned water plant outside the city. The men confirmed it, claiming they had heard it directly from the Secret Service the previous night. Tang Xiao smiled and said it was an interesting trick. The man beside him asked if they should ignore it, but Tang Xiao replied that whether it was a trap or not, Haohan would be there, and no tricks would work with such a strong opponent around. Back at the stadium, Eddie Black's men praised him for making both Haohan and Tang Xiao dance to his tune. Eddie took a sip of his coffee and commented that once they fought each other to exhaustion, he would swoop in like a hero from the heavens and make his mark. For now, he decided to sit back and enjoy the show. After waiting for hours, Lin Fei finally saw someone approaching. Haohan casually asked if it was Tang Xiao, and she confirmed his suspicion. Haohan remarked that the main character had finally arrived, which meant the supporting role could now make an entrance. He was referring to the system, who immediately appeared before him. He commented that Eddie must have arranged spies to monitor the battle and asked for her help in locating them. The system replied that she was only an observer and wouldn't intervene, so he would have to find them himself. Haohan secretly whispered that if she helped him this time, he would try her suggested position with Lin Fei next time. The system blushed and agreed to assist him. Before leaving, she glanced at Lin Fei, who frowned and asked why she was staring at her like that, but the system didn't respond and quickly disappeared. Haohan looked outside and commented that the system was a bit eccentric but refreshingly straightforward, while Lin Fei wondered what the two of them had been whispering about. Meanwhile, Tang Xiao's men searched the entire area and eventually reported that no one was there. Tang Xiao's right-hand man couldn't understand the strategy. They had clearly walked into a trap, yet the other side hadn't sprung it. One of the men placed a chair behind Tang Xiao, and he sat down calmly, deciding to wait. Eddie's spy, observing from afar, reported that Tang Xiao had sat down, but Haohan hadn't shown up yet. Eddie, who was already in his car, commented that he was on his way, but if Haohan didn't appear soon, there was no point in going at all. What he didn't realize was that Haohan was standing right behind the spy, listening to every word. As Eddie told his driver to turn the car around, the spy suddenly received a call and nervously told him that Haohan had arrived and that he and Tang Xiao had already started fighting. Eddie, surprised, commented that such brilliance was rare and told the spy he was on his way. In truth, the spy had been captured and beaten by Lin Fei and Haohan, which was why he lied to Eddie. He begged them to let him go, claiming he had already passed along the message as instructed. Haohan and Lin Fei exchanged smiles before arresting him. A few minutes later, Eddie arrived at the abandoned water plant. His driver commented that there was no movement inside. Eddie replied that it was obvious. The fight must have ended long ago, and the winner was already decided. The driver knocked on the plant's door and forced it open. The tires squealed as the car came to a halt, and Eddie finally stepped out, ready to make his grand entrance. He proudly declared that he was there to take control of the situation, but the moment he saw Tang Xiao and his men, he froze. Their lineup was still completely intact. Tang Xiao wondered aloud who had arrived, and his right-hand man ordered the men to bring the intruder over. Eddie tried to run, but his car had already driven off. The men caught up to him and ordered him to stop. Eddie turned around slowly, trying to sound confident. He attempted to fight back, boasting that he wasn't a pushover, but moments later, he was lying on the ground, covered in cuts and bruises. After beating him, Tang Xiao crouched beside him and demanded to know where Haohan was. Eddie started crying and confessed that he had no idea. He had only tried to trick Tang Xiao. Tang Xiao smiled coldly and said that if Eddie had planned to deceive him, then Haohan must be nearby, watching the spectacle unfold. From a distance, Haohan and Lin Fei observed the scene. Lin Fei asked if they should move in, but Haohan folded his arms and replied that Eddie Black was completely unreliable. Despite all his resources, he couldn't even provoke Tang Xiao into taking real action. Since they still didn't know the extent of Tang Xiao's power, Haohan suggested staying low and following them to uncover their hideout. But before they could act, Haohan sensed someone's presence behind him. A voice echoed softly, saying that they had finally found him. Haohan immediately sensed a powerful presence behind him and realized it was the Demon King. Before he could react, a massive explosion erupted, shaking the entire area. Tang Xiao watched the blast from below and smirked, assuming that Haohan had been caught in it. However, Haohan managed to shield Lin Fei and himself just in time, though the impact left him slightly injured. The Demon King appeared through the smoke, his eyes gleaming with amusement, and remarked that Haohan was quite agile since anyone else would have been blown to pieces like the spy who now lay lifeless on the ground. Haohan smiled faintly at the Demon King and replied that he was flattering him. Lin Fei, still in Haohan's arms, noticed the blood seeping through his torn shirt and realized that he had taken the hit to protect her. Haohan, ignoring the pain, secretly called upon the system and asked if the Demon King had also come from the game. The system appeared beside him and displayed the Demon King's attribute panel. One glance told Haohan that the difference in their power levels was overwhelming. The Demon King completely outclassed him in every aspect. The system urged him to draw a card, promising to boost his luck to the maximum this time. But Haohan replied that the Demon King would never give him the chance. Lin Fei's voice trembled as she asked what he planned to do. Haohan calmly turned to the Demon King and asked why he had come to this world. He pointed out that if the Demon King was simply bored, there were plenty of other ways to entertain himself without getting mixed up with Tang Xiao. The Demon King smirked and asked if Haohan was the lover of the thief girl, adding that his favorite amusement was to make the two of them suffer endlessly. Haohan realized he was referring to Lola Jenkins and muttered that she was going to get them all killed. The Demon King let out a sinister laugh and declared that after killing Haohan, he would destroy half the people in this world because it was far too dull for his taste. He said he enjoyed the scent of fear and chaos that followed him everywhere. Haohan folded his arms and replied calmly that a few years ago there had been a purple potato demon who thought just like him and asked if he knew what had happened to that one. The Demon King raised an eyebrow and asked what had become of him, but before he could finish, Haohan activated a supernatural item that instantly teleported Lin Fei to safety. The Demon King looked at him curiously and asked why he hadn't escaped as well. Haohan smiled and replied that the explosion had been so close that if his body had jumped in, his head would have stayed behind anyway. The Demon King chuckled and commented that he was clever. Haohan straightened his back despite his wounds and said it was time to start the real battle now that the troublesome one was out of harm's way.